Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Searching for Dragons. I'm Snappy, and I'm joined by my dear friend and co-host, Graham. How's it going, Graham?
Very excited for today.
Amazing. So excited to be here with you. And we are Searching for Dragons, the show where we discuss artists who have pursued their creation from a magical perspective. And today we're talking about one of our favorite maguses, our favorite fools, the wonderful, the creative Antonin Artaud, right? What's the
Yes.
book we're diving into today, Graham?
Obliteration of the World. A Guide to the Occult Belief Systems of Antonin Artaud.
Amazing.
Translated by Peter Valente.
Right. So this is a collection of, what was it, 5 essays by Peter Valente? And
Yeah.
Valente is a really accomplished Artaud scholar and translator, and has written several other books on the occult. And he takes this opportunity to attempt to try to systematize, or to at least create a structured vision of Antonin Artaud's occult philosophy, right?
Exactly.
And this is something that we've been exploring and talking about for several episodes. So I wanted to just,
Oh yeah.
before we dive deep into this book, we need to talk a bit about Antonin Artaud and remind our audience who Artaud is and what he means to you and I as an artist. So why don't you begin, Graham? So what is your connection to
Sure.
Artaud? How did you discover him, and what does he mean
Um,
to you?
I discovered Artaud when I was in university for my theater program. That would have been around 2009 that I discovered him. And I was profoundly affected by his work. I found it very life affirming in spite of the cruelty. It's truly magical works, and he was talking about in the theater, anyways, an attempt to use cruelty, which we'll talk about, define that in a second, as a tool for shattering the reality that we live in to create a new reality.
Right. Amazing,
Here's a
amazing.
good
Go ahead.
that'd be a good succinct thing here. Cruelty is not exclusively sadism or causing pain, but just as often a violent physical determination to shatter a false reality. He believed the text had been a tyrant over meaning and advocated for a theater made of unique language, halfway between thought and gesture.
Right.
Like
And
he
then
wants
go ahead.
no,
No,
sorry.
you what does he want? Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say he wanted to create a form of art and expression in life that would bring people and the world closer to themselves and to nature, sort of like a communal transformation with his theater performances.
Right. Right. A shattering of all of these, walls, and the coming into true empowered reality in many ways. And through the negation of our, you see this so this is where my perspective comes in. So I, am very interested, and a couple of years ago when we started this podcast, you're right, I had been deeply, deeply pursuing this quest of finding people who were interested in the mysteries, specifically the Dionysian and the Chthonian, the Median mysteries, this Greco-Roman tradition, and people who were connected to that muse theatrical tradition and invoking this sort of magical mysticism. And Antonin Artaud's name kept coming up all the time in all of these various circles when I would be looking at these things. One of the big inspirations for me was this Attis cult, looking at the writings of Emperor Julian. And you and I, we did a deep dive into the hymn of the Mother of Gods by Emperor Julian. And
Yeah.
I was deeply interested in this kind of Syriac, Greco-Roman, Syrian magical tradition. And one of the things that came up was Heliogabalus, right? And Antonin Artaud wrote a book on Heliogabalus, which we've also dived into, right? Called The Crowned
Yeah.
Anarchist. And that's
Yeah.
such an incredible work. And for me, that is his pinnacle. At least that's the piece that spoke to me the most out of all the
It's a
things that I've
powerful
read,
text.
right? An incredible, powerful text. And then I've had the pleasure of reading several other texts that you've sent me now, but Artaud is really this kind of wild, magical character who really walks a magical path. The other thing that really inspired me was his personal story. Reading his biography, talking to you about his biography, and recognizing the magical performance at the heart of it. He invokes the divine upon himself and goes through a personal apocalypse, a death and a rebirth, a true apotheosis, where he transforms from Artaud the man to Artaud the Momo, right?
Yeah, totally. So, should we talk a little bit more about, you know, so from a chronology perspective,
Right.
he associated himself with the Surrealists at the beginning of the movement, but then broke away from them for a variety of reasons, which I won't get into. But he founded the Alfred Jarry Theater, and that ran for a few seasons, and then he broke off from that to start his own theater of cruelty, and that was in the 30s. Heliogabalus, he was still working on his production of the Cenci, and then 1936 he travels to Mexico, gives a bunch of lectures, is well received, meets with the Tarahumara indigenous, and then joins in the peyote ritual, which gives him a spiritual transformation.
Yeah,
37 he
initiation.
goes 1937 he goes to Ireland with the staff of Saint Patrick, which we'll talk about in part two of this talk. And from there, he was attacked. He was beaten by police and deported after being arrested. And we got to the port town of Le Havre, where no one knows if someone attacked him when he was defending himself or what, but he ends up being put in a variety of insane asylums for 9 years
Right.
consecutively, 9 consecutive years. And during this time, he has a physical death and rebirth from electroshock, which they administered to him, I think, 51 times in the last year that he was there. And then in 1946, he is released from the asylum, thanks to numerous help from his friends and supporters. And that brings us to Obliteration of the World, which is a collection of letters he wrote in this late period from 1946 to 1948.
Right.
So jumped a lot around there. Sorry about that, but
No, but we're getting this perspective, right? Artaud is this radical theater, theatrical performer, director, theater presenter, and philosopher. He's connected to the whole Parisian art world. He's kind
physical
of
art
like,
as well.
yeah, physical art as well. He's kind of like a friend to everyone. It's really interesting how well received he was at this particular time, in his early career. Um, and like you said, right, he begins as a surrealist, but he breaks away from them and he tries to do his own thing several times. He creates his most famous thing was the theater of cruelty, right? But what's wild is we do see that he goes on this true magical path where he goes to a so-called, he goes to the Terra Humera. And this is really important from sort of from the magical perspective that I'm looking for, because he's seeking out a ancient approach that has been lost by the Western mind, right? He's trying to go back to the roots, to a people who still have connection to nature, who still have these empowered rights with the plants and with the spirits, and so he had to travel to Mexico in order to have this initiatic experience. But this is only the beginning of his initiation, right? As we see when he returns, to Europe, he kind of goes through this wild period in Europe where he starts claiming to be Jesus Christ. And he gets his staff of St. Patrick. He goes to Ireland. He has his whole apocalypse in Ireland where, part of the reason too here that's so crazy why he winds up in the mental institution is because he rejects his name, right? in this magical act of self-annihilation, he destroys his ID and says that he's no man. And like, this
Yeah,
doesn't help
it doesn't. It made it hard for his family to find him because he was using a different name. But they eventually do find him, and he suffers like brutal famine, beatings,
And a lot
all
of this
sorts
is
of
around World
brutality.
War II, right? We got to remember when this is
Yeah,
when he is in. It's also quite interesting because this could have potentially saved him at the same time as it destroyed him, because he spends the worst part of the war institutionalized.
he almost yeah. The problem is the rationing.
Right.
All he had to eat was cabbage soup for like a year or something. Like he
It's
was
insane.
the fear of dying from malnutrition.
It was real.
And then he was moved
Incredible.
to a different. He moved through a few different asylums. Yeah, pretty wild stuff.
But these writings are at the very end of Antonin's career, when he has now
Yes,
gone through all of this. He's been freed from the asylum. He's achieved his apotheosis. He's become, as he describes, the Momo, the fool, the idiotes, right? The everyman. And this is such an occult, important thing that deeply connects him to the Dionysian tradition. For Dionysus is the everyman, is the foreigner, right? He is the Xenos, and he is the idiotes, the one who is oblivious to the political world, right? There's all of this kind of insinuation with this that Artaud achieves.
definitely. It's pretty intense, magical works.
Right.
Um,
But
should
that's to
we?
set up. Yeah, that's just to set up sort of where we're coming from. So this is our perspective. Graham was a big, huge fan of Artaud. I came into him through this looking for magical artists and poets, specifically through reading Artaud's poetry. And yeah, that brought us together to discuss him here. And now we're going to dig into Peter Valente's work. So just before we begin with our slides here, I'm going to bring up, please support Peter Valente. They've translated several of Artaud's works, and this is an incredible collection. A lot of thought was put into it, and this is the Infinity Land Press, where you can purchase the collection here, Obliteration of the World, a guide to the occult belief system of Antonin Artaud, right? An incredible work, 5 essays, all discussing his magical perspective. Really, really powerful stuff. And we're going to get into
Totally.
it now. So let's see here.
So this
Take
is
it
the
away.
introduction that Peter Valente wrote. In the following series of essays, I will explore the hermetic side of Antonin Artaud's thought, focusing on letters written late in his life to André Breton, Georges Braque, Max Robert, Annie Bernard, and Colette Thomas. In Artaud's sacred triad, I will use the Kabbalah and Tarot to speak about Artaud's sexuality and magic. In Cubism and the Gnostic, I will talk about Artaud and the idea of representation in painting. And then in 2 other essays, which we'll explore next time, Artaud's Book of the Dead and the Incestuous Father and the Daughter of the Heart. I will talk in the former about the Tibetan idea of the afterlife and Artaud's relation to it, and in the latter about his relation to the various women in his life. The final essay will be concerned with Artaud's travels in Mexico and his various projects, focusing on the importance to him of the mystical staff of St. Patrick. In the following numbered sections, I will map out the occult universe of Artaud from which these essays emerged. So
Awesome.
there's a lot in one mouthful, but
Right.
just highlighting that there's 5 essays that he's approaching.
Right. But these are some incredible stuff that we're going to be getting into, and we're really getting a broad perspective on Artaud, right? From these magical movements that are around him, such as Gnosis and Cubism and Surrealism, right? To talking about his own interpretations of magical perspectives. And this is going to be great. I'm really looking forward to it. There's so much
It-
to dig into. You know,
Definitely.
looking forward to the tarot, because I remember we were reading, what was a book we were reading, Graham, on stream?
The new revelations of being.
Right, right, where he did a whole ton of stuff with the tarot. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
So these are a few little short snippets that set the stage. Phantasms of the real. In Artaud, all knowledge is destabilized. Our Western intellectual tradition is a garbage dump, and God is dead. There is a hole at the center of being where formerly there was a God. For Artaud, this void manifests as a physical pain, but God is alive as spiritual detritus that haunts thought, all thought, as idea. In Artaud, ideas have a disgusting physicality when they enter the mind, the fetid meat of emptiness and third-rate ideas. There is a bardo state between words and things that torments the mind. Thinking man is subject to phantasms of the real, cursed because he has a mind. But for Artaud, thought becomes repressive in nature. For Artaud, concepts infect the mind and lead it to suffer from contemplation of what amounts to a shadow world and nothingness without any real substance. It is there that the dead god and his henchmen dwell patiently, waiting to enter a consciousness and assume a body to practice their sinister arts upon. For Artaud, the rats of the unconditioned, that which does not actually exist, produce the non-form, the abstract outside where the spirits in fact dwell, which appears as an inside in the consciousness of the person when they think, and interferes with the body's ability to act. For Artaud, in order to be, one suffers.
Wow. This is such powerful stuff, and it's just so wildly Dionysian. It really makes me think of also the writings of Nietzsche and of Ludwig Klages and others. But there's this, there's this whole sort of magical thought which says that our current society is built upon dead metaphor, right? It's a garbage dump of lost meaning and propaganda that's been designed to manipulate us and to veil us, to obscure us from reality. And this goes all the way back to Plato, right? And even earlier, because this is such a primal thing that we become caught up and bound within the conceptions and visions of others, false veils that are placed upon us or that we place upon ourselves. And there needs to be this shattering of reality, a return to this primal state, to that every man, to that primitive, for lack of a better word. We see the same thing in Klages, where he's returning to this sort of tribal people, and he's looking back to the ancient past for this deeper connection to the earth and to the image. We also see this, in the Fool card, right, of the tarot, which is Dionysus himself who rules over the tarot. And the whole idea of this Dionysian everyman, right, the fool, the everyman, the Momo, is that this energy is, empowered in that childlike wonder without any of this false conception. The true fool sees the world unveiled. He's an idiot because he doesn't view the veil. He's completely ignorant of the veil,
Makes me think of the Fool in Shakespearean works as well, So
Exactly, right? This is deep Western magical tradition stuff,
totally. Let's keep going.
All right. Powerful, powerful stuff.
The illiterate tongue. For Artaud, the site of a reworking of reality is in the language. To utter is to expel. To name is to cast off. These are magical acts of the breath that confront rational language, such as the language the doctors that tortured Artaud, that put boundaries on the imagination. The invention of God unleashes the spirit in the world that obstructs and haunts the material body. Spirit abstract, body material, duality. Artaud's fury is aimed at the spirit of contradiction, manifesting in duality that allows thought to be possible at all. God is the secret. God maintains a hidden world, so the real appears as the shadow play of signs. The material body is flagellated by the oppression of the sign. God haunts man because man exists as a mind and as a body with language. Something is thought, confronts the mind, is not like a material fact, and this thing injects the spirit in the bone. Naming leads to repetition and fragmentation. Words crumble, meaning collapses, but the shards remain. It's all third-rate meat, but fragments cut and the brain bleeds. The terror in Artaud lies in this veering away from the body as fact, which causes it to be subject to the influx of spirit in the form of ideas. This is the reason why in Artaud, linguistic abstraction must be avoided. For the spirit world, the language game is played out on Artaud's body and in his mind. Ideas butcher the body. Language must return to its origin at the bottom, to a pre-linguistic chaos, a kind of unborn state to the illiterate tongue. Because the spirits are rational beings, whether they exist as abstract ideas or actual doctors.
And this brings us to the barbarous words and the magical babble, right? This takes us into the deep roots. Again, we're returning to this Dionysian Median wildness, right? You can see Artaud as a deep expression, right? It's also interesting that they're bringing in that empowered semiotics because we see this within the magical world, right? Who is the divine Hermes? Hermes is the one who manifests the logos, who takes account, who begins the true perspective and empowers the word, gives it breath and tells the story, right? The very act of naming is to become God. It's to define something, to set it within boundaries, describe it, and therefore to turn it into a spook, right? We're also seeing, I see so much here that relates to what's that guy? Oh my God. The unique in its own. What's that guy? What's that author? The unique in its properties, sorry. And that is Max Stirner, who is another one of these kind of radical occult figures, but also radical philosopher, engaging in similar anarchist modes of thought to Artaud. But, you know, we're seeing this rejection, right? We're seeing this rejection of the sign and to try to, return to a pre-symbolic form of thinking, one that's not bound by language and by perception and tradition. You know, really wild stuff.
Totally.
Okay,
Keep
let's keep.
going. Against reproduction. The birthing myth in Artaud is complex. Strangled totem like a member in a pocket that life rockets so close that in the end the inwalled totem will burst the belly of birthing. The totem, the sacred object, strangled, repressed, forced into birth by the sex act which Artaud viewed as repulsive replication and endless repetition of Father God, Mother Virgin, the two sluttish vocables that father and mother invented, a fantasia of the early primal scene of mommy daddy, and the mystery of the Immaculate Conception.
This is something we see, right? This is why a lot of people want to connect Artaud to the Gnostics, you know, because he does have this rejection of this cycle. But people need to go back and read Heliogabalus because this is not Gnostic. This is Attis, this is Sibylle cult stuff. This is where Artaud is getting it, and he tells us flatly in his own writings, you know, because what we see in the myth of Attis Gallus, right? We discussed this in our episode we did on the Mother of Gods. Attis, in order to go through the divine imitation, in order to break free of the cycles of death and rebirth, castrates himself, rejects the matter, rejects the nymphs and the mud, and rises to the stars, right? There's this whole theme of this solar transcendence within these Orphic, Dionysian, and Sibyllian cults, you know, and Artaud is clearly influenced by this cycle, right? And this breaking free of that image by returning to the primal chaos, by finding that hidden light, the true muse, the true mother, right? Mother.
Exactly. Yeah,
Right? Right? Back
right.
to immaculate conception, right? Because if you're going to the chaos, there is no reproduction. It's just that in the Greek, it's that vaporous cloud from which the things arise. It's this it's the nothings of the particle physicists, right?
Exactly. Well said. So the Immaculate Conception is a petit bourgeois Christian fantasy, a spiritual fabrication which hides the true sexual act. Birthing is to force into the world. The mother's sex organ opened by Boss Pussy's key. A sadomasochistic act which exposes art to the world, reviled by the sex act itself, left to be drainage for angels in the vast nothingness. Artaud believed that sex unleashed the demons of the abyss, malignant and ethereal beings that assault his body all hours of the day and night. Many medieval theologians thought the demons initially acted as succubi to collect sperm from the male, and then as incubi to insert it into a woman's vagina. So for Artaud, the body without organs is without sex. Artaud writes, no mouth, no tongue, no teeth, no larynx, no esophagus, no stomach, no guts, no anus. I will construct the man that I am. And sex for Artaud was a closed door.
Right? He's rejecting all of generation, right? He sees this world as something that must be destroyed, as something that must be transcended to achieve that ionic life, to go back before creation, right? This is a really a wild kind of thing. Also, I wanted to highlight, he's talking about the birth of the image and the creation of the eidolon, the idol. Another thing that we see within, the work of Klages, the totem, the sacred object that's birth, right? And often these idols are birthed. They're invited into the home in a ritualized sex act of creation, right? You're offering the idol your sexes, right, in the forms of ritualized offerings in various ways, but there's this profound life force that must be embodied in those divine images for them to be those true empowered idols. And for Artaud, this is God. God is the idol. There is no God without the idol, right? That
Interesting way
would
of
be
looking at it.
to obliterate God and return back to this primal deity thing that he's trying to get to.
For sure, for sure.
And again, right, he's going back, trying to break free of gender, trying to break free of sex to a time before procreation, before duality, before the expression of the other, and this unfolding of the great game. This is something that we see in many different philosophies, like in the Indian philosophies, in many different occult philosophies. But there's this idea, right, that the one becomes many in order to know itself, right? And then what happens is, in the knowing, we achieve separation, and separation leads to pain. And then pain leads to the reformation of the one. And then we are no longer able to experience knowledge. And so the one becomes many in order to know itself. And then it experiences pain,
Ad
separation,
infinitum.
ad infinitum, right? And we're all back into this mess again. And this is what Artaud is raging against, And so this puts him in a very kind of Eastern Buddhist line of thought as well, which is also deeply connected to the Western tradition in its earliest forms,
Definitely,
Wild stuff.
definitely. So, shards of a physical practice. So this is a letter to Georges Braque. We'll talk about him a bit later. All I need to know is that he's an artist. Artaud's critique of Georges Braque and of the painters influenced by him is that they are still in their works slavishly bound to the representation of this world. To Artaud, they didn't succeed in destabilizing the real enough. However far they tended to abstraction, they could not cease referring to a world created by an absent, yet terribly present for Artaud, God. These painters are bound to matter, geometry, space, representation. For Artaud, all these aspects of a Western tradition obsessed with enslaving man in chains of reason need to be destroyed. In his own properties, Artaud uses his breath and the power of hand gesture to cast a kind of spell on the human face. He writes, as for magic, I take in my thick breath, and by means of my nose, of my mouth, of my hands, and of my feet, I project it.
Wow. So he's trying to, we see this. I remember reading some of his magical spells where he's like, this isn't an image. This is an action. This is an action put into paper, right? This is a ritual
Exactly.
conception made as art. And that what he was doing when he was creating his sigils. His sigils are alive. They're active forces of will manifested upon the page. Like
Exactly.
when we saw those ones, remember those one spell we were looking at where he was condemning his landlady and like burning them with the cigarettes and like some
Yeah,
heavy
he sent
stuff.
out a lot of spells from Ireland and also in the early years of the asylum.
right? Some cool wild magic though, you know.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
this
magic in the
idea
bone.
of, right, getting into this true symbolic, but it's like, active symbols really reminds me of a lot of later chaos magic, right? That would come. And what's also interesting too, this breaking free of reality and try to explore the other worlds and stuff. This is something that we see becomes a major focus of modern occultism, right? Especially in the post Crowley occult world, where there's such a huge emphasis upon these mental universes that can be explored via meditation in the dream, right? The scrying of the Clithoth, or the invocation of magical worlds. We see this from everyone from, people like H.P. Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith to much of the later occultists like Michael Bertio and beyond. So I think Artaud is kind of playing in all of these kind of realms.
That makes sense.
It's really wild stuff. But
It is.
you can see where this kind of magical performance and exploration takes people, right, to transcend the limits of our reality entirely.
Totally. Against everything that obstructs me. For Artaud, magic involved a physical force, a thrust forward of the body, an intense focus on the page. Artaud's quick hand captures the spirit of a face and changes it in matter. Artaud was like a magician banishing the threat of the spirit world, the black magic that he felt was being practiced on his body through what he conceived of as the ugly spirit contained in the human face. In Artaud's drawings, there is a constant movement towards expulsion on all fronts. All the fragmentations, rough lines, smeared planes, darkened corners, burned pages, obliterations of linear space. The portrait retains the shards of a physical practice, Artaud's body at war with life. There is a Gnostic idea that it is not death that infiltrates life, but rather life that appears amid the general inanimation like a foreign intruder. Artaud considered death the supreme lie fostered by God and his henchmen, and life itself a kind of costume we wear. Nietzsche wrote, "Let us beware of saying that death is opposed to life. The living is only a form of what is dead, and a very rare form. Birth infects us with life."
Right, this is again something that's very, very widely and magical, and they're even bringing in Nietzsche, and Nietzsche is deeply connected to this Dionysian magical tradition, right? One of the foremost exponents, in fact. Of course, he moves beyond it and truly manifests his own empowered system, but his relation to it is plain for anyone to see. And this is really wild because we're really seeing Artaud as, Artaud is going through this powerful performance art.
I think I lost you.
Hello, hello, people. Am I here? Can you see me? Are we back? Are we back? Okay, I think we're back. Let me try and invite Graham back to the stream here. Okay. All right. Wow. All right. I think we are back. Let me bring up my slides here. Silly internet. Okay. Wow. Life continues. Okay. Now we'll just see if Graham is still around. All right. So, how's everyone doing? I hope it hasn't been too upsetting. I'm sorry, guys, that we had a bit of an internet outage there, but we continue. We keep growing, keep going. Okay, here we are, page 8. Okay. Oh, and there we go. Graham is back. Hey, Graham, welcome back. We at the internet, things should be okay now, hopefully.
Yeah.
So, where were we leaving off?
Birth infects us with life.
Right, here we go.
Bottom
Bottom of our page here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a second. Okay. Hermaphroditic energy. For Artaud, to speak of an image of mankind is a mistake. Man is simply a plaything in the hands of black magicians. The true anatomy of man was not that taught on the dissecting table. This is Artaud's attack on the Age of Enlightenment, as a result of which all the occult sciences of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance were disregarded. It opened up the world for the rational mind and its obsessive representing of what it sees, what it calls the objective world. Artaud is helpless before the vast council of demonic forces that still plague him in the form of rational spirits that are simply relegated to the unknown, the nothingness. There they patiently wait to incarnate so they can attack Artaud's body. These malignant spirits are against the primal androgynous man. They are the earth's prank against whoever has balls in his cunt. The primal androgyny, hermaphroditic energy. This is an energy that does not enact a principle or calculate because the duality of man and female is destroyed.
And that's what we see right in the crowned anarchist Heliogabalus. He seeks to become the divine androgyne, to transcend gender and sex, and to reform that empowered faunes, right? Wild, wild stuff here. We see that Artaud is doing the same kind of thing. He's seeking to move beyond the duality into the singular, in
Yeah.
the Indian tradition, specifically like in Kashmir Shaivism, we see the androgyne, in this case the Adranahari Ishvara, as the penultimate moment before realization, before we become that Brahman, that true empowered nothing or oneness, right? That which is beyond conception, the infinite. Really, really beautiful stuff. And you're seeing Artaud expressing all of this, and then also there's such, I like how Valenti's reminding us about all of the black magic, because that's such a profound aspect to Artaud's work, is that he views the world as these black magicians that are attacking him. All of these signs, all of these people, they're all out to drive him mad. They're all of these different forms that are preventing him from being his true self.
Totally, it's wild stuff.
Okay, let's continue.
A Luciferian cosmology. The following are the closing stanzas of a poem by Gerard de Nerval, a poet that was important for Artaud. Answer, cried Caesar to Jupiter Ammon, what is this new god being imposed upon the earth? And if it is not a god, it must be a demon. But the oracle invoked had to be silent forever. There was only one who could explain this mystery to the world, the hidden god who gave his soul to the children of clay. In the Gnostic tradition, the world was not created by God, but by Lucifer, the hidden god. Nerval in the poem is speaking of this mysterious god that the oracle had to remain silent about. The nature of this god was known to Artaud. It was the Luciferian energy. Artaud was creating a Luciferian cosmology, with the furious Artaud above, and below him the daughters of the heart yet unborn, and below them the base matter of ugly spirits. These evil spirits are able to incarnate and are felt by Artaud as physical presences. In one of my essays, I speak of Artaud's sacred triad. It is the connection between. For the next slide there.
Before we jump, I just want to talk
Yeah,
about some of
yeah,
the stuff here because okay, we
yeah.
got to get
There's a
into
lot here.
this, right? Because the this whole Luciferian cosmology stuff, right? Lucifer, this Luciferian, this is pure Greek, Dionysian, Median. That's all the same kind of tradition under different perspectives. But what we're seeing here, right? Jupiter, Ammon, Zeus, Ammon, Ammonius, Ammon. Who is Ammon in the Egyptian tradition? It is the hidden god. It is the agnostos theo, right? This is the hidden muse, the one that sits in the silence, the tacita, the tacit pact. You make that pact in the silence with the muse in order to transcend and to become your highest self, to engage in that process of divine imitation, right? To truly do that, you have to engage in that alchemical wedding. You have to fall in love with the muse, with Cybele, and go through that process of imitation, you know? And we're seeing this here, right? That Amon energy is androgyne, it is beyond gender. That energy is the hidden muse. It is the Lucifer. It is the Medea. It is the Dionysus. It is the Great Mother. Right? It's all that one same thing
So many.
from this occult perspective. This is putting Artaud directly within that Hermetic, Dionysian, Luciferian wild tradition. You know.
Totally, totally.
And yeah, with Nerval, right, we also got to remember, like, this was kind of really empowered in the day. We see this from many people that Artaud is connected to. Other figures that Artaud references that that are connected to this same Luciferian current are Charles Baudelaire, for example,
Yeah.
Le Comte de l'Autrement. What?
Yeah, he cites in another book. Wow, the name just ran away from me. Poe.
Poe,
He talks
Edgar
about Poe.
Allan Poe, right? And we know Poe is firmly within this tradition, right? Ligeia, the shrill voice of the muse, exposes that in Morella, right?
Yeah,
Which we've talked about on this show, and people should go back and check out those episodes. But yeah,
yeah, they
right.
were fun.
So Artaud is also part of this kind of romantic Luciferian muse current that's unfolding too. You know,
It would appear
really, really
so.
interesting. Okay, we
So the next
continue.
slide. The connection between inversion, ascetic, non-generative, destructive, the feral, Luciferian destruction by fire, and the body reborn, ecstatic castration, the reconstruction of the body. This triad is like a Luciferian inversion of the Trinity.
Right. Destruction by body, the body reborn, ecstatic castration, right? Attis, Prometheus, Dionysus, right? The dying and the rising god, the primal fire, right? We see this, but if we're going to get into the true Dionysian triad, you got to go to the ancient Orphic cosmology. And this is even prior to the Christian triad. The Christian triad is a ripoff of all this, right? You got to talk about Sabazius, Hypta, and Demeter. That's the original Trinity. Nature, the dying and rising vine, the child that's born that goes through the cycles, and then the Holy Spirit, the empowered muse, the voice, the soul of the world, the hidden God in the darkness, what Artaud is talking about, Jupiter Ammon, right? Agnosto Theo, whatever you want to call it, it's the same thing.
Totally, totally.
Right?
Wow. Wow.
Wild
Let's
stuff.
keep going. Let's keep going. Doubles. In the occult tradition, doubles serve a particular function and fall into two categories. They are either death omens or a type of out-of-body experience. In Britain and Europe, the belief is widespread, and they are known by various names such as Waff, Fey, Swarth. In Germany, they are known as doppelgangers. It is said that the poet Percy Shelley saw his double before he drowned. Catherine of Russia saw her double seated upon her own throne and ordered her guards to open fire on it to destroy it. The belief that the spirit or soul exists in a visible double is ancient and widespread, particularly amongst animistic societies. For Artaud, the real Annie Bernard was assassinated, but she had a double. Death befell the women who were working for Artaud. So he says here, Annie Bernard was assassinated between Paris and Rodez during the night of the 14th to the 15th of October, 1944, and her body was buried in a field, just as the remains of Colette Prue, butchered with an axe in a cell adjacent to mine in September 1937, were buried in a garden in the suburbs of Le Havre. There may also have been a Colette Prue in Paris at this moment, but she is not the one in you at the Dome and who was assassinated, just as Sonia Moss was incinerated.
I also want to talk about, the double, what all of what Valente is saying here is true, but it's so much deeper than this. We have to go to the power of the divine Gemini. The twins are also the twins. The twin imagery is at the heart of all these traditions. The sun and the moon, right? Lucifer and Diana, right? The male and the female, the one and the other, the one and the many. It's always we have this, right? Yeah, Dionysus is the twice born, sometimes the thrice born, but often it's the twice born. And we see this also within the tarot in the this is something that we see reflected in the energy of the devil card, because the devil card represents our double. He is the mirror. He is ourself reflected upon us. He represents us in our adversarial mode, all of our weaknesses, everything that we fail at is then presented against us, and this is why what
Yeah,
holds the keys to our own success or failures. Can we face ourselves in the mirror, right, in the light of the full moon? So there's this kind
yeah,
of slaying of the double is also a big thing, right? Or sometimes one of them having to die for the other to arise, right? We see this with Castor and Pollux. We see this constantly, right? The slaying of the doppelganger to become the whole self, you know? Interesting, wild energy, though.
for sure. The world has fallen and is corrupt and sinister, a world of death and not vitality.
The world of death and not vitality, right? As we tries to arise for the stars. He sounds very Orphic.
Here we go, some juicy stuff. A note on the body without organs. Artaud fought to imagine an alternate universe where he would, as if, return to a kind of womb. In this unborn uterine state, he was not a subject, nor in a world of objects. The outside did not exist, and from this state he would emerge transformed as a body without organs. The body without organs liberates Artaud from the limitations of the material world which he sees as false. The body without organs is both immaterial and solid. It is a body of light in the sense that it cannot be conceived of rationally, and encompasses a mysterious totality like a god of different sort than the Catholic God. For Artaud, this new anatomy involved consciousness as a body without the mysterious function of the mind. Artaud was more concerned with the volume of a body's temper against the spirit that will calculate it. For him, the body was energy, volume, temper, fury. Artaud writes, "There is no inside, no spirit, outside, or consciousness. Nothing but the body as it may be seen, a body that does not cease being, even when the eye that sees it falls." I am reminded of the following passage from the 15th century Italian philosopher Marsilio Ficino's theological dialogue between God and the soul. This is the
Oof,
voice of God. I fill heaven and earth, I penetrate and contain them. I fill and am not penetrated, for I am the power of penetration itself. I contain and am not contained, for I am containing itself. This could be a description of the body without organs. Artaud is attempting to usurp the power of God.
wow, this is wild. Yeah, to become the penetralia that they talk about in the Latin, to pierce the center, the inner sanctum, and to return to that primordial hearth, the chaos gap at the beginning of creation, right? This is the alchemical wedding. This is the whole alchemical magical path, right? To return back, to achieve that ionic life is to return to the womb and to be born again in your own self image, right, to
Yeah.
engage in that divine imitation and return to the beginning. Wow, 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 power, wild stuff.
It reminds me of this passage from a sinister, from the Theater of Cruelty, an ascended text that he wrote.
Hmm.
Who am I? Where do I come from? I am Antonin Artaud, and as I say this, I know how to say this. Immediately you will see my current body burst into fragments and reconstruct itself under 10,000 infamous aspects. A new body through which you will never be able to forget me.
Right. I just keep thinking now also about the penitents, the spirits of mind in the Roman tradition, right? The spirits occupy everything. And there's this whole thing, right? I want to contain them. I want to be the one who is that producer, the penetrator, that empowered will upon creation. Wow,
Redefining
wow.
himself as a creation birthed unto itself and from itself.
Exactly, right? To remove that sex and separation, but rather to give birth to the self as the body without organs. Wild stuff. Ionic
Final
life,
act of the
they call it.
yeah. Here's the last part of this section. Final act of the Magus, obliteration of the world. So it is as if Artaud wanted to self-destruct, obliterate the world, and emerge in a pure state. Not pure in the sense of a Christian being, but one where there was no conflict between outside and inside, world and other, good or evil. A world where there were no concepts, ideas, science, philosophy, or ethics. He wanted to create a new universe, and with it a new anatomy. For Artaud, all of Western and Eastern culture have contributed to the mental agonies of man, with their incessant desire to innovate, create machines, ideologies that lead to wars, and insane asylums for the man who is lucid. For Artaud, nothing less than the absolute destruction and transformation of the world would change things as they are. In his last interview for Le Figaro Littéraire on February 28, 1948, Artaud said, "At this moment, I want to destroy my thought and my mind. Above all, thought, mind, and consciousness. I do not want to suppose anything, admit anything, enter into anything, discuss anything."
Wow, right? This is the 20 in the tarot, the ion, the judgment. This is the magic of the goddess Estrella, Saturnia, the Virgo, the one who sets herself ablaze, destroys the body, and rises to the heights of the stars. This is something we see throughout the Greco Roman tradition. The hero cannot become apotheosized, cannot achieve transcendence until they die the final death. And it's usually within flames. The one I mentioned, Estrella, but also Heracles, the greatest of heroes, has to be put on a pyre and burned in a state of near death, right? All of the great heroes have to achieve the catabasis. They have to go through the fires. They have to
You,
burn out the ego, right?
you're gonna like the next section.
Obliterate the self in the world.
Yeah. So here we go. Artaud's sacred triad. A Kabbalistic analysis of a certain passage in a letter to André Breton. So, for those who don't know, André Breton was sort of the spearhead of the Surrealist movement in France. In
A
this essay,
magician
I
in
will
his
use.
own
Hmm?
a magician and magus in his own right.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. I want to finish with magic arts still.
Right.
So, here we go. In this essay, I will use some of the attributions to the Hermetic Kabbalah devised by Aleister Crowley to analyze a passage from Artaud's letter to André Breton, written on Paris on June 2nd, 1946. It is unknown whether or not Artaud had any contact with Crowley's writings, or whether he or Crowley were even aware of each other. Either case is probably unlikely. But what cannot be disputed is that Artaud was fully aware and often skeptical, if not furious, about the many aspects of a Hermetic tradition that include the Tarot, Kabbalah, and Eastern mysticism. In fact, we have a late letter to Jacques Prevel from Ivy-sur-Seine, dated June 4th, 1947, where Artaud speaks explicitly about the Kabbalah and rejects what he sees as a cock and ball stew, a larva coming out all over in an angry rash of the desolate, rejected angels of the mind. These rejects never made it as angels and never were a mind. If God is above all innumerable and unfathomable, and nobody ever could or did have God's number, then why not cease and desist from incessantly measuring and enumerating all these shadows of non-being, into which, according to the Kabbalah, he is in the process of withdrawing, beyond any possible return or recourse, from innumerable numbers of creation?
Wow, right? He's basically saying, the whole magical, this is all nonsensical because you're just kind of analyzing the retreat. You're analyzing the death. You're watching the slow death. You're just measuring all this stuff. You're not achieving anything. You're just, you know, you're slaves to that deity. Right. And this is
Yeah.
this is such a Luciferian approach, right? Like
Yeah.
so is very much Lucifer. First thing you notice is you guys are slaves to the measurements and actions of the God, right? You're allowing yourselves to be predefined and have this form imposed upon you. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
And yet there,
Sacrosanct super reality, right?
yeah, yeah. Yet there's a word sacrosanct or super reality that comes up in the late letters written between 45 and 47. It is a curious word in light of these pronouncements and many others in these letters which reject the idea of God. Is this a Catholic residue that haunts Artaud's investigations into religion and the nature of being? Indeed, his obsession with the mysteries of God and the problem of being has something of the defrocked priest about it. Whatever the case, the Hermetic Kabbalah created by Crowley is a skeptical one, and nothing about its mystical function or practical importance is taken for granted. Crowley writes, "We do not believe in any supernatural explanations, but insist that this source may be reached by the following out of definite rules, the degree of success depending upon the capacity of the seeker, and not upon the favor of any divine being." Crowley's system accords the body a central position in the discussion of mysticism and magic, i.e., he creates a link between sexuality and spirituality. The sacred and the profane are not considered as separate. For this reason, its use here is appropriate. I believe it can be used to elucidate some aspects of Artaud's preoccupations with magic, and more importantly, in connection to sexuality.
You know, there are so many parallels between Crowley and Artaud, even though they are operating from kind of radical different perspectives and coming at this from very different means. They both come in the end to a certain kind of individual anarchism and this radical pursuit of apotheosis and in achieving this kind of divine prophetic revelation, right? Both of them are on this similar magical path, and both of them are utilizing the Kabbalah. But what I find truly interesting about Crowley's approach to the Kabbalah is his empowered will about it. And a lot of people get upset about this because he plays with the Kabbalah and he has the audacity to break with tradition and to reinterpret it through his own perspective and lens. And he uses science, or at least his iteration of science, and as proof to justify his changes. He's like, the Kabbalah works better for me. So, and I have all this documented evidence to prove it as such. But this is the thing that I find interesting. They're both playing in the detritus of the Christian tradition and trying to use it for their own magical prospective, their own magical works of self-creation and obliteration and discovery. So there's so many parallels here.
Yeah, yeah. You said it best. So, are we on the next slide now? Yes.
Yeah.
The essential practices among the many occult orders, including the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis, the lodge that Aleister Crowley joined in 1910, which employs the Thelemic system of initiation. It is a training of the consciousness to specific ends. Crowley writes that. Sorry, I'm hard to see here. Crowley writes that the function of meditation is the restraining of the mind to a single act, state, or thought. In the OTO, for example, there is the daily adoration of the sun, Liber Resh. There's yoga, meditation, and rituals such as the Mass of the Phoenix, all aimed at the discipline of the mind and the body. And the importance of this with regard to sexuality is known in the many occult traditions in the East. In their book, can you read that?
Awake Kundalini, Rajnikant Upadhyaya, and Gopal Sharma, quoting Swami Sivananda, right? The yogi who draws his semen up and preserves it conquers death. In
Thank
this
you.
letter to Breton, Artaud writes that the training of the consciousness with respect to sexuality is a means of creating states of near eternal overcoming of the base materialism of the world. The ultimate project of Artaud was the theft of Promethean fire, the creative sexual function of God to assert the preeminence rather of man as deity, creator, and supreme ruler of all things spiritual. Right? Okay. I want to pause there because we
Yeah.
see this same kind of thing within the Luciferian tradition. Okay. Right. And what do I mean? You know, look at, there's this whole empowered, right? You have to rise to the throne, empower yourself in your will in order to make nature orgasm and in order to make Demeter laugh, in order to empower and to transform reality. So there's this all of this stuff that's going on here, right? That the
Yeah.
stealing of the Promethean fire, the Kundalini power, both Crowley and Artaud are recognizing the Eastern tradition's similarity to the Western, and they're connecting it in that sexual procreative magic, the utilizing of one's power to one's own personal end, the taking of that spark and training it, of compounding it, right? And this is a really powerful thing because we see this in both the Eastern and Western traditions as this ongoing thing, where there's this belief that engagement in the world, engagement in greediness, in the cycles, being bound up in all of this would lead to true destruction, right? In the East, you see this in figures like the Buddha or in Shiva and the sadhus, right? You have to abandon all of this stuff in order to become self-realized beings. In the West, right, we see this in the many different philosophical traditions, specifically the Cynics and a lot of those magical wandering desert fathers, and as well as you see this in magical founder of Rome like Numa, right? Numa, who engages the muse and is kind of the template of one of these magicians, right? He does two empowered things in order to connect to the muse. One is he gives up material and he says that he will subsist on water and bread, for that was good enough for the ancestors. This is the king of Rome, right? And then he engages in a 5-year vow of silence while meditating in nature. So there's this whole disconnecting, going into the silence, and rejecting nature, rejecting our sexual functions, the castration of Attis and Aegisthus that we see, right? All of this magical empowerment, both Eastern and Western traditions are filled with this kind of monastic traditions of empowerment through control of the body and control of the self. There's this belief, right? We are bound by our karma, we're bound by our desires, and our greed and our pleasures are our biggest way to enacting karma. Our biggest way to leading us off the path into causing pain and suffering. When you think about it, right? What turns us into beasts? What allows us to commit violence? Like none of us would steal or hurt from someone, but we all just engaged in Halloween and ate a ton of candy, which we all know takes child slave labor and is abusive and destructive to our planet, right? Because we're removed from the direct violence, and because it satisfies our pleasure, we can engage in this destructive behavior, right? Whereas the monastics, they are recognizing this. They see the roots of their desires as constantly leading to this pain and suffering, and so they reject them, right? And this is something both East and West.
Yeah.
Wild stuff, eh?
Totally. For example, to Egyptian cosmologies, that one is able to retain power over the infernal swamp of spiritual emptiness, the slime of Chem set up in the gates of Amenti. It is important to note that Artaud speaks elsewhere of the sacrosanct consciousness, that he means something very different than the idea of the sacred that was inherited from the Abrahamic religions, and in fact perpetuated in such systems as Kabbalah as it is traditionally known.
I also want to pause here because he's talking about the infernal swamp of spiritual emptiness, the slime of Chem at the gates of Amenti, right? What we see again within the Greco-Roman tradition, the parallel of this in the Gallus Attis story, where Attis finds himself bound up in the waters, in the mud with the Nymphi, in that overindulgence and desolation. and that abusive cycle bound up in in the earth, in the mud and the filth, you know. But sorry, let's continue.
No worries, no worries. It's great. For Crowley, Eros is holy, and the world of the senses, the crude manifestations of Asiya, the lower kingdoms of Malkut, are to be alchemically transformed by the initiate into Kether, the crown. In one sense, this does not mean ascending from Malkuth to Kether, since on the Kabbalah the tree of heaven grows downward like a flaming sword. Furthermore, when we look up at the stars, we are not really looking up at all, but down within ourselves. There is no difference between the macrocosm and the microcosm. Kether is in Malkuth. Malkuth is in Kether. Man is God. Artaud imagines himself as a kind of furious Christ who suffered on the cross against his will. He writes in a letter to Henri Pinceau from Rodez, December 1945. In any event, the police and the rabbis of the time decided one day to get rid of me and arrested me at night in a garden of olive trees where I slept under the stars, not having a roof to shelter me. I went to trial, but although I was recognized as innocent of any crime by a certain Pontius Pilate, the people, filled with imbecility, rose up to demand I be crucified.
Wow. This is kind of wild. Okay, so we need to unpack a little bit the Crowley stuff here, right? When they're talking
Yeah,
about Eros, right? Eros is the force of love, but they're talking about cosmogonic Eros, Phanes, the divine androgyne at the start of creation, the cosmic man that embodies the totality of the Kabbalah. So all of the Sephiroth are contained within Eros, you know, and in the traditional, you know, Christian and Jewish Kabbalahs, this is kind of an evil thing, right? Like that Eros force causes the cosmic man to be ripped apart and to fall in. It's that force that leads to separation, and it's a negative thing, right? And you see some of this in Artaud for sure, right? He rejects sexist, but Crowley does not. You know, for
no,
Crowley, that Eros is empowering, and this cycle is empowering, right? So that's one of their differences, which is kind of
yeah.
interesting, you
In the
know?
theater, in his, I think it's in the theater in his double, maybe I can't remember exactly, but he says that no, I lost it. Sorry.
Oh, it's all good, all good.
brains all over the place right now.
But
And like
anyway,
Christ, he rise, and like Christ, he rises from the dead, furious. I was so horrified at my own state and at all things that a shiver of fury overtook me, an earthquake which made me overturn everything, and all of us fought for more than a day in Judea. It
wow.
also bears noting in the context of Artaud's letters that the lower world, Asiya, is where the spirits dwell, those beings that ceaselessly harass Artaud. In the letter to Breton, Artaud writes, there is nothing indeed, Andre Breton, like coital orgasms when they are methodically pushed to the limit to train the consciousness in certain states of near eternal overcoming of things, to which I think this line of Villon may correspond. Empress of the Infernal Swamps.
Wow. You know who the Empress of the Infernal Swamps is? You know why this is so ridiculously magical? We're talking about Tacita. We're talking about the goddess of silence. We're talking about the true foundation of Rome here. Now we're getting into some interesting secret stuff, right? Because
Yeah.
Tacita is this nymph. It's a secret name for Hecate, right? This
Oh,
this power goddess of magic, right? And the hidden muse, but there's all this wildness in the stories, right? When you look at the story of Tacita, which you can find in Ovid in his Fasti, if anyone wants to go check it out. Tacita, she is a nymph, one of these empowered muses, and her sisters are being harassed by Zeus, by Jupiter, right? And so what she does is she speaks up for her sister. She stands against Jupiter. She goes to the goddess Hera, to Juno, and tells her, you know, what's happening. And for this, you know, she saves her sister, but then Zeus decides to rip out her tongue and cast her into the swamps, right?
whoa.
And she gets put into the swamps by Mercury, Hermes, and they together make love and give birth to these magical spirits called the Manes, the spirits of the dead, and the Lares, right? Wild, 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 wild stuff. And there's multiple layers to this kind of imagery that's going on. With Latium is the swamp, Rome is where she is cast, that's where she's building her Babylon, right? You know, it really wild that he brings up the Empress of the Infernal Swamps, right? Because that is pure Hecate Tacita.
Love it. I love it.
Anyway,
You're gonna love
continue.
this next part too. Artaud writes that this near eternal overcoming of things corresponds to the verse of Vion, Empress of the Infernal Swamps. Perhaps in choosing this quote, Artaud was thinking of the Empress Tarot on the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, whose path is between the two Sephiroth, understanding, Bina, and wisdom, Chokhmah. This path forms the base or foundation of the uppermost triad, whose pinnacle is Kether, the crown. While the triads below point downwards and form the sign of water, the single uppermost triad above the abyss, supernal triad, forms the sign of fire. Furthermore, the path connecting Bina to Chokmah is a bridge that connects both fire and water. Above the abyss, it is represented by the false Sephirah, Doth. The Hebrew word associated with this path means door. This is the door that connects the microcosm to the macrocosm and asserts the original unity of man as God in the dissolution of duality.
Yeah, the Empress card, right? The power of nature. This is the great mother energy, but it also connects us to that higher energy of the hidden light, the hidden moon, the true muse, the power of the chaos, the womb from which we arise, which is representative of the two in the tarot, the high priestess. So there's probably a connection here. I think that Artaud was almost certainly referencing Hecate Tacita, right? But there's also definitely a tarot connection because the Empress is also referencing Hecate energy here. It's just, well, Aphrodite. It's complicated. You know, the tarot is not a direct overlay onto the Greco-Roman tradition, but there are these similar ideas, right? You have the goddess
Yeah,
veiled and an unveiled, Isis, right? Aphrodite Pandemos, the natural version, the one who gives birth to all creation, and then Aphrodite Urania, the transcendent perfected other, you know, the mother as whore and the mother as, you know, virgin. But these two empowered images. But, you know, that's a very Christian kind of way of framing it. You know, Crowley is all about rehabilitating these ideas. The Empress is that empowered energy of nature. It's the great mother as Demeter, right? That force of creation. And takes us to that highest hidden muse, allows us to return to that empowered understanding beyond, you know, we can we can cross that hidden Kether, right? They're talking about Doth, which is the
yeah,
abyss, right? Crossing the threshold of death. And then we can enter into the realms of beauty and arise to the heights of the idea in the crown, right? Where you get to those powers of the fool and of the magus and of the high priestess, you know, really
right,
wild stuff.
right. On the next slide,
Okay.
Artaud writes, "It is in this way and not in other, Andre Breton, that the masses of which you speak dominate us. And that is to say, by the sinister way of their longing for ass. Here we are in the lower world. Belkuth, the world of the senses, sexuality understood as bodily function. But Artaud continues, ass, I mean sexuality, is useful, Andre Breton. I'm not saying the opposite. It is an excellent means of expansion, emission, and I would dare say propulsion. But that is not all. Sexual magic is perhaps the highest and most difficult practice in magic, but it is easy to see, for example, the ways in which sexuality can be used magically in common practice. I'm thinking of the use of glamour as a seductive tool in LaVey's The Satanic Witch. But more importantly, Artaud believes sexuality can be a means of propulsion. Crowley writes, love is always bold, virile, ecstatic, even orgiastic. Mighty and terrible and glorious as it is, however, it is but the pennon upon the sacred lance of will. Sex is the ecstasy that is shaped like a spear that pierces the ancient dragon that sat upon the stagnant waters. While Artaud recognizes sexuality's propulsive force, He is also aware of his ability to enslave the consciousness. The masses, he writes, dominate us by a sinister longing for ass.
Right, this is the problem, right? This is the beauty and the problem of that sexual act, right? It's the little death that can lead to true transcendence into empowered bliss, or it is that thing that can bind you into the earth and materiality, where you are stuck fulfilling that lesser death and never achieving the transcendent higher realization. you know
Mhm.
Wild, interesting.
Keep going. We must
Yeah.
pause for a moment before we can continue in order to examine the meaning of certain numbers in the following passage by Artaud, where he is speaking of destruction by fire. This is from New Revelation of Being. Because on the 3rd of June 1937, the 5 serpents appeared who were already in the sword.
Wow. Well, I'm already okay. First off, the three, the energy of the three, right? We're talking about the Great Mother. This is the power of generation of the weave that calls us together. He was talking about the Empress. The Empress is the three in the tarot. 1937, right? You've got the one, the
Yeah,
Magus, the nine, which is the Hermit, but also the power, the ending of the cycle at its absolute height, the most
you,
powerful energy, the energy that completes the cycle. The
you're gonna
three, the
like
Great
this.
Mother, and then we have the seven, right? The seven is the harmony of all of the notes of the lyre. This is the magic of Apollo. And then the five, that's Venus power. Anyway,
Yeah.
wild stuff.
The The five
Really good.
serpents appeared who were already in the sword, whose strength of decision is represented by a staff. What does this mean? It means that I who am speaking have a sword and a staff with 13 knots. And this staff bears on the ninth knot the magic sign of the thunderbolt. And 9 is the number of destruction by fire, and I foresee a destruction by fire.
Yeah, that's wild, right? Virgo is the one who sets herself ablaze and rises to the stars. And that is the nine in the tarot, the hermit, and the completing of the cycle in the Pythagorean number system. The nine is the absolute height. I foresee a
Yeah,
destruction by fire, right? That's inevitable. If you wish to return back to that primal spark, you must be burned up in the fire. This is something we
yeah,
see in all of this stuff, right? The 13 is
totally.
also really important. The 13 in the tarot is death, Scorpio, taking us to the four, the crossroads, but it's also the number of Hecate, for she was the 13th month where she was celebrated, and the 13th day of the lunar month was her
Oh,
sacred
wow.
special day, you know? Really
Yeah.
powerful. What does Crowley have to say here?
The number 13 is significant to Crowley's Kabbalistic symbolism. The Hebrew word for love, ahava, and one or unity, echad, all have the numerical value of 13. If you add 13 to 13, you get 26, whose attribution on the tarot is the devil. The Hebrew
Right.
letter for I, ayin, is also connected to this card. In Crowley's system, this is Lucifer, the light bringer who opens the eyes of the blind and those chained by dogma and law.
Right, breaking free of all the chains, breaking free of all of that false conceptions, and empowering oneself and one's true will, right? Really
Totally
facing the true adversarial energies of the self and of society. Wow, wow, wow.
pretty wild stuff. The number 9 is important for Artaud, since it indicates destruction by fire. The ninth letter of the Hebrew alphabet is Tet. Its numerical value is 9. In the Kabbalah, the number represents the ninth Sephirah, Yesod, whose meaning in the Arcanum is sex. The word also means foundation. Sorry. It is also an elemental letter that symbolizes the serpent. The 5 serpents Artaud speaking of could be the 5 serpents of the Book of Revelation, who were followers of Apophis, an Egyptian demon. Teth also appears in the Torah in the word Tov of Genesis chapter 1, verse 4, meaning beneficial. Artaud is speaking of a fire that destroys the created false world to the very foundation. Furthermore, and perhaps more importantly, Tov is the word in the Torah used to describe the hidden or primordial light. Artaud's search for the primordial light led him to a rejection of normative sexuality to further clarify the matter. In Art and Death, Artaud writes, speaking of Abelard, what a beautiful eunuch. In his essay Lacan with Artaud, Lorenzo Chiesa writes, Castration is an attractive imaginary lure, the mirage for reconquered unity, which accompanies him from the self-identification with Abelard. Artaud proposed a kind of Dionysian castration. Right up front. This is one of my favorite quotes. And to have done with judgment of the god, he writes, but having him undergo once more, but for the last time, an autopsy in order to remake his anatomy. I say, in order to remake his anatomy. Man is sick because he is badly constructed. We must decide to strip him in order to scratch out this animalcule which makes him itch to death. God, and with God his organs. For tie me down if you want to, but there is nothing more useless than an organ. When you have given him a body without organs, then you will have delivered him from all his automatisms and restored him to his true liberty. Then you will teach him to dance again and inside out, as in the delirium of dance halls, and inside out will be his true side out. As above, so below, as within, so without. The duality microcosm macrocosm no longer exists.
Wow, 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 wow. That's such wild stuff here.
That's one of my favorite quotes. It's just totally intense.
Artaud was a definite Dionysian, and he's going through that, obliteration of the self to become the Xenos, the everyman, the fool, the Momo, the idiotes, right? He's on this specific path, right? Which is to truly perceive the world unveiled and to accept reality as it is, to just be in that profound energy of joy and wonder, to take the leap into creation and to move freely, right? And eventually to move
Yeah,
beyond this realm and to create our own, to achieve empowered ionic life, right? Where we are manifesting our own reality,
constructing a new reality.
right? Wild
So,
stuff.
so
Where we assume the
asceticism,
power of God, right?
yeah. um, love between man and woman has to remain platonic. Organic generation and the phallic jouissance, which is physical or ideological ecstasy. It entails are for Artaud a priori, a synonym of the degeneration insofar as we follow the loss of a primordial unity. One recalls Artaud's insistence that he was not born of a father or mother, but like a god generated by his own will. In a letter to Martha Robert from Espalion, March 29th, 1946. There is a mystery in my life, Martha Robert, whose basis is that I was not born in Marseille on the 4th of December, 1896, but that I passed by there that day from elsewhere, because in reality I was never born, and in truth I cannot die.
Wow.
Pretty wild.
Incredible, He's definitely walking this kind of Dionysian magical current,
Yeah, totally. In the passage above, he is describing the qualities of a god who dwells elsewhere and cannot die because unborn. Crowley writes that witchcraft is restricted to the use of such women as are no longer women in the magical sense of the word, because they are no longer capable of corresponding to the formula of the male, and are therefore neuter rather than feminine. As an example, he speaks of the masculine Amazon type woman. Furthermore, he writes, I am hard and strong and male, but come thou, I shall be soft and weak and feminine. The body without organs is also neuter with regard to sexuality. This body can only create through destruction. But Crowley writes that the effect of a specific use of this magical power concentrates a magician who performs it in a very special way. The great merits of this formula are that it avoids contact with the inferior planes, that it is self-sufficient, that it involves no responsibilities, that it leaves masters not only hung stronger in themselves, but wholly free.
There's a lot more. I just want to pause. There's a lot going on with this Amazonian type woman, right? Because there's this
Yeah, I
power
didn't
in the
understand that.
okay, this is it's hard to unpack all of this because, right, you're talking about Crowley has a very limited perspective of the Greco-Roman tradition, I find, and like he's not terrible, but he's not
It's not
good
his
enough.
forte.
No, it's not his forte, right? It's not his forte. It's one of many things he dabbles in. And a lot of his understanding is great, but like he's also a product of his time and his place. And he's coming out of this
Totally.
Victorian patriarchal mode, right? When you want to recognize the power of the Amazon, you got to look to Achilles in Pennsylvania. Okay. Pennsylvania is the queen of the Amazons. She is this empowered warrior who accidentally kills her sister. And in order to achieve in order to achieve forgiveness from the gods, because she accidentally shot her sister on a hunt, she goes to fight in Troy, to commit herself to die in battle, to fight until she dies, just for the sake of glory, in order to remove the sin of having killed her sister, right?
Wow.
She fights Achilles. And for the first time, Achilles is challenged. He meets someone who matches him on the battlefield. Now, Achilles winds up killing her, but in the moment that he kills her, he falls madly in love with her. Why? Because he recognizes his match, his other, someone who is completely equal to him in every sense. Now, this is truly important because Achilles is not a traditional man. He was raised by women. He wears the long hair and he was taught all of these women powers. He was purposely kept away from male training because he had a prophecy where he would die in combat. And so his mother was trying to prevent him until he was given a sword and he ran off to go join the battle. But what we're seeing is you're seeing Achilles, who is a man-woman, an androgyne, who's empowered, meeting a woman-man, an androgyne, empowered. Both of them matching each other as equals on the battlefield, fighting for glory, right? There's a lot more going on in this, right? It's to truly become a magus, to truly become a master in the Greco-Roman sense, you have to move beyond gender. You have to be able to transition between them. We see this in the most
Definitely.
empowered magus of them all, right? Which is, the great, what's that guy's name? Oh my God, it's going to bug me. I'm too tired already. Homer, the great sage what's his name? Gandhi, help me out here. What is the guy who transitions genders? The great magus. Anyway, the point being is that this is the thing that we constantly see. Even Heliogabalus, right? He tries to become that androgyne. Tiresias moves beyond gender, right? Medea there's this understanding that she becomes this empowered emperor, that she achieves this masculine power, and that's when she rises to her heights. There's all of this merging of the genders when you start to get into the true magical characters.
Totally.
Anyway, just as an aside, I just wanted to say that.
No, it's important. It's important.
Okay.
Go on the next slide here.
Okay.
Furthermore, Crowley speaks here of the mercurial virgin and the hanged man, and states that in this special use of magic, the creative force is employed deliberately for destruction, and is entirely absorbed in its own sphere of action, as is the absolute body of Artaud, impenetrable and autonomous. Nevertheless, this work is regarded as holy. Artaud writes, "A natural force altered by woman will free itself against and by woman. This force is a death force. It has the dark rapaciousness of the genital. It is provoked by woman, but man directs it. The mutilated femininity of man, the enchained tenderness of men that woman had stamped on, had revived a virgin on that day. But it was a virgin without body, without sex, one which only the mind can profit by."
Right. Okay, this is wild stuff, and we need to unpack, right? They're talking about the hangman card in the tarot, which is so profound. This is the 12, right? The number reduces to 3, which is the great mother energy. It's also the primal elemental water, and the energy of facing ourselves in the abyss, of facing our fears, and of committing a sacrifice, making an act of change in order to overcome our limits and come into flow. This is this sacrificial energy, Attis castrating himself to engage in the divine imitation. This is Odysseus strapped upon the mast in order to face the sirens, which are those feminine monsters, those birds, that sexual energy again, right? This repressed feminine power, right? The magic of poetry and the power of song, which is both illusion and the magical ability to shape reality. The power of God that must be revolted against and taken. and used as our own, right? We have to take back
Yeah.
the logos and use it as our own force.
Totally. Totally.
Mm-hmm. Wild.
Love it. Love it. Where are we here? Here we go. Sorry, my sight has gotten significantly worse over the past year. Sorry, it's kind of hard to read this.
Let me
Um,
know if you need help.
yeah, maybe you could read this one. It's
Okay.
possible.
No worries. There also exists a connection between the Hebrew word ein, I, and non reproductive, hence destructive sexuality. In the Arcanum, the I can refer to the anus and thus to the homosexual act, but can also refer to the phallus. In the Book of Lies, Crowley writes Shiva the destroyer is asleep, and when he opens his eye, the universe is destroyed. But the eye of Shiva is also his lingam, phallus. Shiva is himself the Mahalingam, which unites these symbolisms the opening of the eye, the ejaculation of the lingam, the destruction of the universe, the accomplishment of the great work. All of these are different ways of saying the same thing. The final death, but also that beginning of new life. Death and life begins in that sexual procreative act of bliss and unity, right? This
Totally.
is not a Genesis story. It reverses the act of creation. Through the inversion of the sexual act, there is a movement towards primordial unity, right? This is what you see in alchemy, right? This is the you go to the end of the cycle so that you can return back to zero, go back to the cosmic womb of creation again, reform the divine androgyne in that cosmic gap, that light beyond matter, right? This is
Right.
the destruction of duality that came into being with the created universe. This non creative power that destroys does not give birth yet in a very particular way. In The Vision and the Voice, Crowley writes This is the great idea of magicians in all times to obtain a Messiah by some adaptation of the sexual process, right? We're always talking about the child to come, giving birth to a Plutus or an Apollo, right? To a Dionysus, to an Athena. It's always that next generation that will manifest the Savior, the child to come who will protect us. Right? This is the great idea of magicians of all times to obtain a Messiah. In Assyria, they tried incest. Greeks and Syrians mostly bestiality. The Mohammedans tried homosexuality. Medieval philosophers tried to produce homunculus by making chemical experiments with semen. But the root idea is that any form of procreation other than normal, my emphasis is likely to produce. Wow. Right? So this is what they're saying, the non-procreative sexual act, because what is that? That is a waste. We're no longer empowering ourselves in life and creation, but we're seeking self-destruction. We're going into that left-handed magical path. Like we really should be, you know who I think is really applicable to a lot of Artaud is George Bataille, right? Who we talked about several times. And George Bataille's exploration of the left-hand path as that will unto death, the true self-destruction, that true end of the self that is found in the exploration of absolute pleasure, which is also absolute experience, which can ultimately cannot rise to anything greater than death. Right? This is why for George Bataille, for him, he wanted to be decapitated, right?
Yeah.
He wanted the Acephalus. In Acephale, that's a Greek Roman mystery Dionysian
Acephalus.
cult thing,
Yeah.
you know. So
Totally.
we're seeing the same kind of ideas throughout all these characters. Crowley, Bataille, they're all in this left-handed Dionysian
But but
Chthonian thing.
but Ty really reminds me of Artaud in the sense that he was demanding a spiritual transformation of society.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, and they both kind of come out of leftism and abandon it for this kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
radical self-destruction.
Yeah. It's
There's a lot
wild.
of parallels. It's interesting.
There are. Just keep going.
Okay.
He was here are Artaud's daughters of the heart to be born, unborn because virtual, essential, limitless, magical. In The Screaming Body, Stephen Barber speaks about this image, says they were a group of warrior girls who Artaud, in the isolation and sterility of his internment, had elaborated as the embodiment of his desire to liberation. He named them his daughters of the heart to be born. This fantasy included women Artaud knew and admired, as well as his grandmothers who were genealogically inverted to become feral, erotic children ready for battle for Artaud's release.
This is
Here's
such
the
wild
connect.
imagery here because it just makes me think of the nymphs, the daughters of Artemis, the muses, these empowered women who have that magic and that connection to the divine, right? And Artaud is calling these people to come in, and they're here to liberate him.
Yeah,
Artemis, right? She is that ultimate force of liberation and justice. I always think of the story of Orion, where Orion is chasing the innocent girls, the Pleiades, right? And so Artemis has to get involved and send the scorpion to come and beat his ass,
yeah.
there's
Love it.
and there's a lot of this kind of magical imagery here with these warrior women and the nymphs and the muses. Love
Totally,
it.
totally. Here's the connection between inversion, ascetic, non-generative, destructive, the feral, Luciferian, destruction by fire, and the body reborn, ecstatic castration, the reconstruction of the body. This is Artaud's sacred triad.
Wow.
And we'll go to the next slide here. Artaud concludes his letter to Breton by stating the essential problem of existence. The Hindus say that this world is an illusion, and that we are a part of it, that we must leave it to discover reality. For Artaud, this world, the kingdom of Malkuth, is illusory, dominated by vile spirit magic. He writes, the human consciousness is not clean. We are a part of the illusion, and the true anatomy of being is not the one that is taught and dissected on the anatomic tables, but that of a negligible skeleton dead at the bottom of some of us. The dead body must be revitalized and transformed into the true magical anatomy, a kind of astral body without organs, ungenerative, autonomous, and above all, impenetrable.
The creation in the Kabbalistic sense of the Merkaba, the empowered chariot, the force, the spaceship, the throne that allows us to manifest our own empowered dreams. Now we're getting into some true occult wildness where we're moving beyond our own individual realms and we're scrying the Qliphoth, moving into these alternate realities with that astral body, right? With that magical templum, that empowered chariot, the Merkaba, right? Now we're getting to some serious, wild, weird magic.
Totally. So
Love it.
that ends that first chapter, and
Amazing.
this is the second essay in the book, and we'll at the end of this one we'll uh, pack it in for the night. But a bit more wildness has to be experienced.
Right,
So
right.
this is
We need to dig this.
Cubism and the Gnostic, Artaud's letter to Georges Braque. So for those who aren't familiar, Georges Braque was he was a painter and an artist. He was very influenced by the artist Cézanne, who was an impressionist painter, and he was closely associated with the school called Fauvism, which is sort of like the stepping stone in between impressionism and cubism. And he
Interesting.
eventually does contribute a lot to cubism along with Pablo Picasso. They were born around the same time. So that's who George Braque is.
Real important artist.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay.
In her book Artaud and the Gnostic Drama, Jane Goodall has discussed the parallels between the Gnostic heresies and Artaud's work. Importantly, the book establishes a context for viewing Artaud other than an icon of failure and madness, but rather in possession of certain heretical ideas that are more enduring and powerful than any post-structuralist theory. She writes, Artaud is the most extravagant of heretics, may appropriately find himself in company with the Gnostics, whose speculations served to define heresy for the Church Fathers. In this essay, I want to analyze a certain passage in a letter written to the painter Georges Braque in Paris on January 16th, 1947, which begins the discussion of aesthetics, where Artaud develops certain Gnostic ideas that preoccupied him throughout his life. Brock believed that the viewer experienced beauty in terms of volume, line, mass, weight, and through the beauty he interprets his subjective impression. Furthermore, objects shattered into fragments as a way of getting closer to object.
Wow, the aesthetic magical path, right? Again, very Dionysian, right? Bacchus and adoration of Venus. We experience true beauty through the perception of the real, through engaging and transforming reality, and through that coming into that true subjective impression. You have to witness the beauty within nature. This is the power of the poet. The poet can transform the image into something transcendent. They can witness the filth and make it beautiful, right? But the beauty is inherent and beyond either the word or the image, you know? Wild stuff.
Yeah,
And
super
I
wild.
love that we're talking about, we got to pause and say, rest in peace to the beautiful Dr. Jane Goodall. She wrote
Yes,
an
rest in
incredible
peace.
book, Artaud and the Gnostic Drama.
I
But
own
it's
it. It's great.
right? But ultimately, she kind of concludes that Artaud is not really a Gnostic. He's kind of tangentially
Yeah,
related, as we discussed, right? He's far more connected to this Sibyllian, Syriac,
yeah.
Dionysian,
You can see them drawing from maybe similar sources, but expressing them and interpreting them differently.
right? Coming about this in different realms. Artaud is going back to a deeper place.
Yeah,
Then
yeah.
he's not staying within that Christian tradition. He's moving
No,
beyond it.
he has this
Um,
totally weird syncretic thing where he picks and chooses from every sort of religion and school of thought and
Very
molds them into his own.
magical orientated, right? This is what a witch,
Yeah.
what a wizard does.
So you get cut up. So you get cut up for spirituality and
Right?
mythology.
This is what I mean is like Artaud, and he's coming around at this time, at the same time, in the 30s and the 40s, but he's really this kind of early magical figure for what was going to come, right? Like what we see. He inspires. He's one of the key figures who inspires a lot of these chaos magicians of the later turn of the century. So we have to
Right.
remember that as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, let's continue here.
Sure. Brock writes, fragmentation helped me to establish space and movement in space. He adopted a monochromatic and neutral color palette in the belief that such a palette would emphasize the subject matter. If we look at Artaud's series of drawings from 45 and 46 in Rodez, we see the influence of cubism and his use of geometric forms, particularly the square or cube, and the fragmentation of objects seen from multiple perspectives. Artaud also restrains from the frequent use of vivid color. Often color is muted through smearing or roughly applying it to the paper. This muted quality brings the various objects into the foreground and emphasizes their dominance and interaction inside the frame. For Artaud, cubist painting by an unconventional use of geometrical form, simultaneous perspective and fragmentation destabilized the rational forms that constitute the Euclidean basis of the created world. And yet Artaud was aware of the limitations of these practices, and indeed took them much further into new territory that virtually obliterated any sense of the pictorial or representation of customary reality.
Right, as we talked about with his magical acts, right? His symbolic signs that are even greater than signs or symbols. They're literally motion on the page, right?
And
Ritualized
for
performance.
those intrigued by Artaud, the fact that maybe you hadn't heard that he was an artist before, we did a episode on drawings and portraits on examining his visual art.
Right, that was so much fun.
It was great. So people go back and find that. Artaud, drawings and portraits. Had to think there. Thus, Artaud writes to Brock that Cubism puts the occult linear world into question again, but there isn't even a tear in the internal tissue. It is occult since for Artaud God retreated into the unknown after his creation and hides there to oppress mankind. It is God's absence that puts into question the meaning of the created universe and puts the burden of representation and explanation on man. Thus, man is plunged into an abyss of intellectual inquiry that Artaud conceived of as a battle with the reigning spirits of the material world that ends in darkness and confusion. Artaud writes, yet in the work of other paintings it is everywhere. It seems like, underneath the blank slate, the painter has wanted to stumble upon the internal mechanism of an already made cosmos instead of creating a new one.
Can we truly create anything new or real, though? This is another thing we constantly see within the magical tradition, right? This idea of trying to be spontaneous and real and to truly manifest something that is unknown, right? This makes me think of, again, a later writer, but Genesis Peorage. And this is one of the things
Yeah.
that's a major occupation of her, of their, sorry, magical work, which is trying to be something truly unique and authentic and to create something new. And they were uncertain if they ever did it in their lifetime. you know,
Yeah,
you know, like
totally. I think it means like better than for a lot of people it's better the devil just work within the status quo as opposed to challenging it or creating a new perspective.
right. But for these truly magical creatives, that act of imagination and creation that is the magical performance itself, right? The bringing the imagined into reality and that whole
Yeah,
play. This is what they're
poetry is
after. They're trying to become God. They're trying to be the true visionaries, right? To define the experience and to mold it.
totally. You could say that art and poetry are almost like an egregore.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great way to phrase it. You know, they represent these living, they're spiritual entities, right? We're creating, like as Artaud was even talking about, these signs and symbols take on a life of their own, which is both empowering and obscuring. And the magician is the one who wields and recognizes these spirits, recognizes
Absolutely.
the propaganda at play, who plays in the detritus. This is
Uh,
the thing, right? We were talking about both Crowley and Artaud are complaining, oh, we're built on all this dead metaphor. We need to return back to these primordial traditions. And yet they're playing in the filth and they're remaking it in their own image,
yeah, yeah.
right?
I
It's
love it.
powerful stuff. It's fun. All right.
It is. Let's keep going.
Okay.
Artaud tells Brock that this is not enough. The example of Cubism spread throughout the arts and its increasing influence as Picasso and Brock began to evolve their individual styles. But for Artaud, there's an essential problem with the Cubist method. It does not tear at the essential foundation of reality, and is thus bound to repeat various simulations of reality. No matter how far it went, if it continually worked within the components of that reality, it would still be bound by the internal mechanism of an already made cosmos. And so it is still this world that is represented. Artaud is concerned with the problem of representation. He is concerned with the dissolution of the customary reality which he believes is illusory. He writes, "It's not a question here of drawings in the proper sense of the term, of somehow incorporating reality by drawing. They are not an attempt to renew the art in which I never believed in, of drawing. The line or dash is not enough for Artaud. He seeks a more physical engagement with the text and the image. He writes, I get up, I cast about for resonances, for adequations of sound, for swayings of the body and limbs, as might constitute an act, calling out to the ambient spaces to rise up and speak."
Right. You're becoming that empowered deity that invokes the spirits, that calls consciousness into being, that gives name to the forces of the darkness. Right. Artaud's a magus.
Such a dragon.
right.
This is something more than aesthetic theory. It is a bodily confrontation that takes place, which is also a kind of banishing of the spirits through ritual. It is a war waged against reality in order to realize man in his proper relation to it. Artaud writes that to understand these drawings as a whole, one has to 1. Leave the written page to enter into the real, but 2. To leave the real, to enter into the surreal, the extra real, the supernatural, the supersensible into which these drawings keep on plunging. To go beyond reality into the supersensible, the supernatural, is to attack the spiritual world directly. For Artaud, this is the world of ideas. A spirit is an idea that manifests in the surreal or the abstract. The artist is forced to plumb these depths where demons dwell, to find meaning in the absence of a god. Also, Artaud does not want to be bound by the page or portrait, but desires a direct confrontation with reality. The drawings are commentary on an action that really took place. They are not the representation or the figuration of an object or a state of mind or fear of a psychological element or event. Rather, the drawings reproduce a magical gesture that was executed in real space. In order to understand the reason for Artaud's magical gesture, apart from considerations of aesthetics, we must examine the Gnostic heresies and their relation to Artaud's project.
Oh wow, interesting,
What do you make
interesting
of
stuff.
this?
Well, I'm the magical act of creating, of moving beyond reality, of becoming that empowered force of will. Of again, this makes me think of a lot of the later occult traditions that we see, from Kenneth Grant and people like such, Michael Bertio, the scrying of these alternate realms, the creations of these science fiction realities, empowered visionary experiences, the playing with the fiction and the real, and the truly, all of this comes out of this kind of thinking. Artaud is really in this magical realm where meaning is about what you make it, where you become that empowered visionary and that creator, right? And
Yeah,
the drawing is an act of will. It is a force that calls these ideas into being, right? Like we said, it's a spirit. It's all of these ideas are spirits,
yeah.
and he's recognizing that all of this consciousness is the problem for Artaud. It is both the tool that you weaponize, and it is also the issue, right? Because he imbues all of that as alien. His own consciousness is alien. Himself is alien. He has to obliterate all of this to achieve his true empowered realization as the everyman, as the Momo, right? To obliterate the world is to be left only with God, and that is the self, the true self, right? The
Yeah.
penetrative.
This all reminds me of a book that I really want to translate with Draconic Works when
Mm,
we get there. By I think it's a Dutch writer. I can't, his name is eluding me now. But it's about an artist who strives to create a piece of art so abstract that it shatters reality.
that's wild, right? It
Yeah, it's really
challenges your
wild.
very
I
conceptions of
really want to.
reality and points out that it's false. How can this
Yeah,
exist? Oh wow.
yeah. I really want to find like a literary translator for Dutch to
What is it?
bring that
Yeah,
into English because it's such a wild concept.
right. Interesting. Interesting. You'll have to remind me who that our author is and what the book
Yeah,
is.
I have it, but I can't pronounce it.
No worries.
I'm not gonna try and insult Dutch people, but
You know, but
I'll
yeah,
send
the,
you a
the
link.
magical ritual action, the performance, the donning of the costume, right? The creation of art, all of this, the creation of poetry, right? This is all about invoking one's will upon reality, about manifesting one's
Exactly.
empowered image. And that's really what Artaud is doing with his drawings. They're a performance in order to tell a story and to impact the spirits, to call forth new ideas.
Definitely. That's why I named my one of my anthologies "The Shape of My Will," which is actually part of an Artaud quote.
Oh, wow.
Um, he says, "By committing suicide, I will reintroduce myself into nature, and I will for the first time show the shape of my will."
Wild.
Um, Pretty wild, but yeah. So just keep going. Gnosticism is a very complex subject, wide-ranging in influence, and with many subtleties among the various doctrines. It is in fact a word that does not exist in any ancient source and was coined in the 17th century. Artaud's central heresy against the Catholic Church was his idea that man must raise himself above God and achieve in this way a full realization of his true power. He uses his knowledge of the tarot to discover a truth about himself. He writes in 1937 in a work entitled Diagram of a Horoscope of Saturday 19th, 1937, on the initiate. 14. Temperance, self mastery. 1. Juggler standing, properly directed will. 11. Strength, spiritual energy. 17. Star of the Magi, regeneration. 10. Of batons, harmony. King of Cups, domination. Ace of Cups, will at the service of the senses.
Oh, wow. That's some interesting, you know, points to attach to each of the cards. I mean, temperance, art, self mastery is apparent. It's the alchemical card. It's the solve coagula, the coming into true empowered creative force. The juggler, right? The fool, the standing properly with directed will, right? The part of this, we see this in Crowley's iteration of the fool. In his version of the fool, drawn by Lady Frida Harris, there's a sun in the genitals of the androgyne, because the androgyne is leaping into creation from that empowered force of the sexes, right? They're inspired by their erotic drive, and then they're invoking their will forward into creation, right? So this is
Right.
all about leaping after what we really want. And the fool is in that childlike wonder without concepts, right? Like they're not bound by all of the detritus of modern society.
A
They're
naive
not,
and
and they're naive. Yeah.
a naive innocence. Yeah.
Naive innocence, right? Unmanipulated and unclouded, right? With by society. So they can have that will completely focused upon their desire without impediment. You know, spiritual energy
Totally.
for strength makes sense. The regeneration, star of the magi, that's interesting. You know, because the this is the force of Demeter, the power of Demeter, the crying out to the ancestors, the crying out in desperation in order to call the cycles into regeneration, right? Which is
Right.
beautiful. The Ten of Wands, harmony, right? The Ten of Wands, the Ten of Batons. Um, that is also the breaking of the chains of Saturn, coming into true empowered self recognition and self acceptance, no longer being bound up by false conceptions, right?
Wild.
It's the breaking of the chains of oppression. King of Cups' domination is interesting to me. I mean, the King's Force do have that fiery domination. I mean, there is the fire in the water in the King of Cups, you know, this coming together in that steamy intensity. They manifest that polar extreme. And the King of Cups does come to force, to passionately unite us together. Um, the Ace of Cups, will at the service of the senses, right? We're serving our emotional fulfillments in the cups, in the aces. It's interesting stuff here.
It is not super typical of what you would expect of a tarot.
Well, you know what? It's there's a deep understanding of the tarot here, and I want to point that out to people, right? Like Artaud is moving beyond the surface level meaning, and he's getting to these core empowered roots, right? These are really good empowered words to have here.
Definitely, definitely. And there's an alternate horoscope dated June 15th, 1937, on the tortured man. Two of Pentacles, division. 15, devil, two principles. Eight of Pentacles, destruction. One, juggler upside down, badly directed will. Knave of batons, ruin. Fool, madness. 13, skeleton reaper, transformation.
Wow. Okay, this is interesting stuff. The Two of Pentacles, this is change. In the Golden Dawn decks, it'd be harmonious change, but the inverse of that is certainly division, right? And the Two of Discs is one of the hardest cards in the whole deck because it's about facing the nature of reality, that everything is in a constant state of flux, right? And then the devil, we talked about this already in relation to Artaud. The devil is about facing the devil. It's about facing the devil. You know, you have to face yourself in the mirror. There's those two empowered principles. You have to be able to overcome your base nature and rise to the heights of the stars, to slay your basal self and to become your best self. You know, the juggler
Right,
upside down is badly directed will, right? The youth that makes that bad judgment, that recklessness leading to destruction. The fool is madness is interesting. Well, I think the juggler. I'm getting confused because I guess he means the magus because he has the one there, right? And the
yeah,
magician.
yeah. I can't remember which. I remember reading somewhere that he uses a specific type
He
of deck.
probably uses the Marseille deck. That's one of the most popular French decks.
I'm
And
trying to
it's one of
remember.
the I think it's the Marseille deck that he uses. I'm not as familiar with the Marseille, but that's a real classic, powerful French deck. Um, but yeah, the juggler is the magus, the magician, the one, right? The one who's balanced in himself, who's telling his story, empowered in his will. The fool is madness is interesting, you know, because madness
Yeah,
is both. craziness, and empowerment. And then the 13 as transformation, that's a given, right? The power of the metamorphosis, the going
Yeah,
through death, really powerful stuff.
totally. I was trying to find out if I could see what tarot deck he used, but
I'm almost certain it's the Marseille. We talk about it in the episode where we go through it.
that's true.
Mhm.
So here, division, destruction, badly directed will, ruin, and madness lead to a final image of the skeleton reaper that denotes the final transformation. As David Rattray notes, the sequence 11, 14, 17, spiritual energy, self mastery, regeneration, which in the tarots are reflexes departing from 5, abstract man, and 8, justice, portal of the infinite, also represent paradoxically in their sequence the descent of soul into matter. The paradox disappears if you remember that on the tree of life, the flaming sword descends from Kether to Malkuth. At the same time, a serpent rises from Malkuth to Kether. The macrocosm is the microcosm. It is this knowledge of the balancing of oppositional forces that leads Artaud to the final illumination. The tortured man has become at last to be recognized by the whole world as the revealed one.
Wow. Wow.
The
As the
revealed,
revealed
yeah.
one. As the revealed.
And
Okay.
that was the name that he put on the new revelations of being when it was published. Simply instead of Artaud, he wrote the revealed one.
The tortured man come at last to be recognized by the whole world as the revealed, right? That's after you pass through the ion, through the judgment, after you go through the flames, then you enter the world card, the universe, where you become that great mother empowered upon the throne, giving birth to her own manifested reality, right? Now you are the God transcendent. And this is interesting, right? He's connected. David Rattray notes that sequence relates to the abstract man 5, which is the Hierophant. You know, um, the Hierophant is Venus and Taurus. This is the force that calls us to draw down that empowered vision of the stars, to connect to that ancestral magic and to plant the seed in the earth, to create true empowered culture, to cultivate the earth with wisdom, right? So there is this moving between the divine and the earth, right? The Hierophant is that force that does it. And then the justice is also that force that does it within the tarot, because the justice, right, is the 8, the one that breaks the chains, that calls us to become our highest self, right? And is also deeply connected to the 11. The 8 and the 11 are interchangeable energies. Crowley
Wow.
himself inverts these two energies in his tarot, where
Oh
justice
wow.
becomes the 11 and strength becomes the 8.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of wildness with this energy, this power of
Yeah.
Themis, that force that leads to true harmony and realization and balance, that returns us, right? This justice energy is the force that brings us back into true unity and harmony, within the tarot.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
So it's interesting.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Indeed, the revelatory aspect of Artaud's work would become even more pronounced and complex in later years. Artaud never abandoned his prophetic tone, his sense of revelation, his desire to enact his ideas of revolution in the real world, and thus convey to the world that this tormented man was capable of self-transformation and change even after his time at Rodez. His fury never diminished. In the following, we are concerned with Artaud's outward manifestation of a magical act and its relation to representation. He writes, burning is a magic act, and that we must consent to burning, burning in advance and immediately, not a thing, but everything that represents things for us, in order not to expose ourselves to being burnt up whole. 10 years
Hail
later,
Virgo.
sorry,
Hail Saturnia. Sorry, continue.
yeah, 10 years later in February 1947, Artaud would write, the goal of all these drawn and colored figures was to exercise a curse, to vituperate bodily against the exigencies of spatial form, of perspective, of measure, of equilibrium, of dimension, and via this vituperative act of protest, to condemn the psychic world. and the figures that I thereby made were spells, which after so meticulously having drawn them, I put a match to.
So this is the wild thing, right? In order to destroy the psychic world, he uses psychic forces. He manifests his own spooks and he
Yeah,
sets them ablaze. And look at this. He's telling you the fire is that empowering force of birth and death. By setting his spells ablaze, he is literally turning them into empowered spirits, empowered ideas, taking on a life of
exactly.
their own, a magical act of birth. Whoa.
Wild stuff.
Yeah.
The image is burned as though in an alchemical fire to neutralize a curse. Artaud's act is a simultaneous simulation of the end of creation and the return to origin in the fire of divine light, free from bodily limitation. In delayed portraits, Artaud is examining the representation of the body. He intends to violate the human face, that empty force, that field of death. His concern is with an alternate body, non-representational, without organs. He penetrates and scratches the face in search of a light behind the form, that which would designate the real body. He writes that a painter who currently persists in reproducing the features of the human face, such as they are, cannot be faulted for doing so, since they have not yet found the form that they, the features of the human face, promise and designate. He describes his drawings not as art, but as probings or burrowings in all directions. For Artaud, this is an attempt to destabilize and violate the stranglehold representation had on him. It involves a physical activity, not a mental one. Indeed, for Artaud, art and life were not distinct from one another. The revolution of the body's representation must be absolute or not at all. He wants to tear the veil that covers the world in illusion and breeds spirits to torture the madman. Artaud wants to penetrate to the truth.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful stuff.
Right? Uh, at the bottom here. So his critique of Bracken of the painters influenced by him is that they are still in their work slavishly bound to the representation of this false world. However far they tend into abstraction, they cannot cease referring to the world, a world created by an absent, yet terribly present for Artaud, God. Looking at Brock's paintings, Artaud writes that Brock always had the impression of a will to total genesis, without external drama, the pure sought after element following its intrinsic necessity calmly and without passion. It was because his genesis was criminal, Georges Braque, and this cannot be understood immediately. But looking attentively at certain open forms, recomposed by you, one would have said you knew it beforehand. But I've always had the impression that you did not want to absolutely solve the problem.
Wow.
It's calling him out, being like, you're close, but you're missing the point, you know?
Right. This is the thing, right? He's saying, he goes, you guys have, you move beyond the limits of the human perspective, right? You twisted all of these dimensions and you're able to perceive reality in its abstract form, right? But you're still bound by the world that you're abstracting. You're still
Exactly.
conceiving, like Picasso is still making beautiful women. He's still doing self-portraits, right? Where Artaud is like literally trying to destroy his face.
Yeah, yeah.
you know, so there's a very different magical act involved here, right? Where one is expanding of perception within the framework, and one is exceeding the framework.
Yeah, yeah. Wild stuff.
Yeah,
Is there more?
cool. Yes, it just
Like I
froze
can't
on
remember
me.
where I left. No worries. I was gonna remember how long, like how many pages there
We
were.
got like, I think 15 or so. We got 60 slides. So okay, we're coming up to 50 here. This is slide
Oh
49.
wow.
We got
Sorry, everyone.
11 more slides. No, we're going good. We're people are loving this, I'm sure.
Okay. The idea of the criminal genesis is heretical. The world is imperfect, flawed, because the creator God is flawed and imperfect. Artaud understands that to repeat the external drama in figurative art does not succeed in the total genesis that he envisions, total transformation of the world. Artaud wants to start from the origin. He speaks of Braque's open forms, and by this Artaud suggests that Braque had acknowledged the imperfection of the created world, and the need to leave the world of representation behind. In his Rodez drawings of 46, there is in the sense of a wide open spaces in the various forms, sometimes resembling the body, and at other times sinister machines, seem to be floating in a translucent and somewhat gelatinous space. But Artaud realizes that Braque did not want to solve the problem. Furthermore, in the above excerpt, he writes of the pure sought-after element following its intrinsic necessity, calmly and without passion. For Artaud, this is a function of the directed will, fully realized and activated. Artaud writes, I mean that there is in my drawings a sort of music moral that I have made by living my strokes, not with the hand only, but with the rasping of the breath of my trachea and the teeth of my mastication. I mean to say that we are filmy-eyed, because our current ocular vision is deformed, repressed, oppressed.
Okay, we'll pause here for a second because I just want to just talk about this idea, right? Like, this is a wild thing. He says he recognizes that Brock understands the issue. He sees the flaws inherent in our reality, but he doesn't seek to do anything about them. He rather relishes in them. And this is the issue that he has with Cubism. It rather points out the flaws, points out the ability to enter into this abstraction, but doesn't really say or do anything. But it just
Yeah,
it
yeah,
brings us into the abstraction and relishes in it, but then doesn't try to move beyond that. Doesn't try to create something new. Rather
exactly.
just abstracts the created world. You know, so I also just love this thing where he's talked about his drawings as music because music is something that occurs across time. It's coloring and decorating of time, of life, right? It's important to understand this aspect because his drawings are an empowered force that are operating within time. Even though they're a static image, they are the representation of a ritual action, and they are active, in their static nature,
Yeah, totally, totally.
which is kind of crazy, but beautiful and interesting.
Yeah. The very way our eyes are constructed presently does not allow us to see through this false spectacle of the world. For Artaud, the struggle in its essence doesn't cease, simply because it is concretely signified by lines and points. Artaud seeks to rediscover the forces of creation, the hidden primordial light in the archaic visual language of these drawings. The reason for this reconstruction of reality is that nature is everywhere. Nature is there. She is guilty. I have an idea of the way she should have evolved in order to be pure, really pure, and safe from the mark of sin. But I am a man, and am myself evolved from end to end. And I believe this. When the architecture of man is rebuilt, maybe this will be noticed. It is the heart, in any case, which has sinned, not through kindness of the soul, but through the idleness of sexuality.
Through that creative game, right? Through that infinite diversity and that ever expansion, right? Leading to waste and filth and pain, right? And leading for a longing, this deep manifesting of nostalgia, right? That turns into a bitter pain and hatred, right? Wow, wow, wow. This is a very Gnostic approach to this,
Yeah,
as much as we've been saying, Artaud is dancing with Gnosticism. Sometimes he comes out and is very, oof,
stark.
interesting.
Yeah.
The idleness of sexuality, right? Oof.
Artaud attacks the Catholic conception of sin and its relation to sexuality. In these late letters, he will pursue the idea of a pure state where sex, procreation, and the concept of God and evil do not exist. Some strains of Gnosticism believe that because sexuality is pleasing to the body is evil and part of the material of creation which they sought to transform. Thus, the denial of the pleasures of that body is just as punishment to be safe from sin. They also believe that procreation merely generates more divine lights to be imprisoned in the physical body. By remaining celibate, these Gnostics refuse to engage with the material world. Artaud writes that there is a pain enthroned in my whole body, and he relates this to the pain of orgasm, which was no more than the perverse extension of this pang of orgasm. It had sharpened between my thighs, and the subsidiary muscle it had wound up to meet the needs of its vile hunger. For hunger, appetite, taste, the need to be nourished, stemmed solely from this vile orgasm muscle with which being made love, and was therefore split into man and woman, male and female, whereas there had been no sex in the beginning.
Wow. You know, again, right? We see this, personally in my own conceptions, I think that this is a fundamental flaw. As much as I love Artaud, I think the rejection of nature and the denigration of nature into a whore is one of the great evils, right? You know? And he kind of recognizes some of this evilness and rejects a lot of the Catholic constraints, but at the same time, he upholds many of them, right? He's still within this kind of, you know, um, yeah, he's still caught up in this Addis reject the nymph stuff, reject generation, you know. Whereas I'm far more into someone like Gas Boucher, who's like, no, 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 we're diving deeper into nature, right? We're
True,
going
true.
deeper into it, right? We're not rejecting all of this creation and try to hide from it, but rather we're going through the cycles and evolving.
Yeah,
Right.
he kind of contradicts himself in other writings, Artaud, and he says that mankind is gonna have to bleed as payment for the crime of having been knowingly misled about nature and reality. You know, and he talks about how all these esotericisms are trying to redefine our connection to nature and go beyond the self. So, he kind of contradicts himself depending on what point in his life he's at, I would say.
Right. He's a complex figure, right? And
He's
he's
descending into
wildly
matter
informed.
to reconstruct it to ascend from matter.
Right. Right. He has to become God and recreate the universe in his own image. Right.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
there's not a pure reject. It's not the same kind of rejection that you get with the Gnostics or with the Catholics, but there is still this rejection, though.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. For Artaud, the creation of this world is imperfect. He states the problem in the following way. By him the sexes have been separated with the flame, for he knew by nature the flame of love won and lost. And in order to make them accept this separation by the flame, he first played with his own flame. At first he pretended to be an extravagant lout, and the destiny of man and the universe is suspended by this mountebank of a lout. This is Artaud's alternate creation story. Through the separation of man and woman, duality is introduced into the created world. A loutish god plays with his flame, i.e., masturbates, and through this act the world is created. Thus,
This is
sexuality is linked.
so Egyptian. Okay. This Amun, this is Amon, the hidden god. This is what he does. He masturbates into the great cosmic gap. And that's how the universe comes into creation.
Love it, love it. Thus,
Right?
sexuality is linked with the creative impulse that causes the ceaseless proliferation of bodies that imprison the primordial light. Furthermore, all that proceeds from woman will contribute to the division of all things. Thus, man is suspended over an abyss, unable to resolve his dual nature. Woman is a death force, as is nature. Duality proceeds from reproductive creation. Thus, Artaud is celibate and ascetic.
Oh man,
Detached
he
recluse.
condemns the divine feminine. No, Artaud. No, no. Continue. Sorry.
Well, I think that it's more like woman as a death force isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Well, this is something that we see in a lot of these in a lot of these occulted systems, especially ones that are more of a patriarchal focus. It's this understanding that the feminine is that nature, it is the procreate, it is matter, it is that on one hand, it is all this negativity, but it is also that force of empower of transformation and change. But it's that we we also feminize this force and we otherize it and yeah.
Totally, totally. Artaud writes that he is a man evolved from end to end, and that this will be recognized when the architecture of man is rebuilt. He will absorb the cosmos into himself. He writes in 1937, the portal of the infinite is opened for man. The tortured man is at last prepared. He can enter. He stands on his own feet before his work. He can begin. The Ptolemaic system of the medieval universe was a finite world, where God resided at the apex and man at the center. The direct relation between man and the Christian God was thus contained in this cosmology. Ideas about infinity introduced by Hermetic thought destabilized this finite realm. An infinite God cannot possibly relate to a finite world. And man was now faced with the monstrous universe, the vast nothingness of unbounded space and the threatening outside. For Artaud, the infinite represents an opposition to the finite world of forms. Here I am reminded of the words of Hermes Trismegistus,
Trismegistus.
the first wise man, according to a legendary of antiquity. God is the Artaud, is
God
the
is the.
primordial light.
I don't have it,
Did I screw it up?
or I may have.
No, I think it was me. That's okay. We'll go from here.
Okay.
No, next one. Here we go. The infinite sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. Artaud usurps the power of God. After 1945, Brock began to work more slowly on his paintings, taking years to complete them. Many were made during occupied France under very difficult conditions. He was not documenting the warriors, but retreating into an interior world. He said, "As I go on working, the picture itself takes over. There's a struggle between the idea, the picture as preconceived in advance, and the picture that fights for its own life." Brock's later work is densely layered, luminous, otherworldly. Even in still life, he was searching for the essence of the object.
Wow, that's cool.
Totally. Artaud writes to Brock about the mystical nature of the work of art and mentions the Etruscan mysteries, eventually talking about a race of men who were virgins. Perhaps I could say where the sensible truth was, the unalloyed sensibility, which knew how to preserve its race, and so it is in the last paintings of George Brock, year after year, a kind of sensibility is released, which reminds me of certain Etruscan mysteries, a sensibility that guards itself from the unctions of a sodden heart. Here Artaud speaks of the unalloyed sensibility that knew how to preserve its race. This is the sensibility prior to the soul's descent into matter, before duality entered creation. It is unalloyed because it is liberated from dichotomies. In the new revelations of being, Artaud writes, "I really did identify with myself with this being that has ceased to exist, who has left reality behind. This being is God." And furthermore, Artaud speaks of a race that knew how to preserve this sensibility. In 1937, Artaud writes, "In a world given over to the sexuality of the woman, the spirit of man will recover its rights." In this previous quote, Artaud speaking of a race of men who were liberated from the duality of the created universe. They're both male and female. Burgeoned, they are the natural revolt of things we have turned to ill use, and not subject to the unctions of a sodden heart, born of that idleness of sexuality.
Wow, wow, wow. This is kind of wild here because, this really makes me think again of this energy of the goddess Estrella, the divine Virgo, right? Because if we go back here, right, he says, I really identified myself with this being that has ceased to exist, who has left reality behind. What is the story of Estrella? At the end of the golden age, she sets herself ablaze to rise to the heights of the stars, ushering in the Iron Age. But there is a magical promise, right? And this occurs in Virgil's Eclogues that Saturnia will return, and then that golden age will come back with her once again in this cycle, right? But it's that God that left reality behind, that abandoned creation for the heights of the ideal, and as such now is being called back into creation, is now being called to come into that wedding again, right?
Totally.
This is kind of also an inversion of the Kori myth, the Persephone myth, right? Kori is brought down into the earth. She's abducted and forced into that creation, right? That's the antithesis of the Estrella myth, where she abandons the world and achieves apotheosis, you know? Now
Wild.
we're at so there's some wild magical imagery that he's alluding to, throughout all of this.
Totally, totally.
And talking about this gender stuff again, right? The maguses, the powered priestesses, they're transcending gender and sex. They're
Yeah,
empowered in this duality, right? Where they're both male and female. They become penetrated by the god Apollo and they're able to speak his voice. They're given that power and authority of the cosmic man, you know? They cease to be simply these virginal children, but become these empowered forces of the universe.
Totally.
Let's see here.
The Etruscans were a civilization of ancient Italy, located roughly in an area that comprised Tuscany, western Umbria, and northern Lazio. Their system of belief was polytheism. They considered all visible phenomena to be a manifestation of divine power. This power was distributed among individual deities who continually influenced the lives of men. Two initiates, Tagas, a childlike figure gifted with presence, and the Vigoya, a female figure, advised men on the will of the various deities. Their teachings were kept in a series of sacred books. Not much remains of this lost ancient civilization, and most of its history was swept away after the Romans established the empire. For Artaud, the Etruscan mysteries signify that which is lost, the primordial light of origin that receded with the creation of the world. Artaud's letters to George Braque is at once a commentary on Cubism and an exploration of certain heretical ideas that preoccupy Artaud with the search for supra reality. He
This
goes
also,
beyond mere.
go ahead. Sorry.
No, go.
I was just going to say this also, this continued talking of the Etruscan confirms my thoughts about the swamp empress Tacita, because the
Yeah.
swamp empress Tacita is the Etruscan goddess Angerona, right?
Oh,
It goes back the Etruscan is really going to this ancient, even earlier Pelasgian root, right? That is even predating the Latin, and the sacred Sibylline books, the sacred books of the goddess, right? There's this whole story about the founding of Rome, again, with this Rhea Silvia Tacita character who gives birth to these 12 twins, and where a secret hidden one comes in and is adopted in after one dies. And that becomes Romulus,
wow.
who takes over the
Oh,
country. She is the
yeah.
Lupa, the wolf mother. But this is, the Lupa is a really powerful image because the wolf is also in Greek the power of light. Apollo and Artemis, they're wolf gods as well as they're light gods, and the
Right.
Lupa, this is also a play on the Latin word for prostitute, right? And
Right.
Acalarentia, right? Another one of her names that Gandhi's bringing up is the mother of Lares, the mother of the spirits, So all of this Etruscan mystery, this is deeply proving to me all of this Artaud connection to the Dionysian Cybele stuff, to
Totally.
Tacitus.
Totally. Wild.
Yeah. Anyway.
Just wild. We're at the bottom here. He
Mhm.
goes beyond mere aesthetics to question the essence of representation. He speaks of the pitiful awkwardness of forms that comprise reality and are merely works of aesthetic simulation of reality. Artaud writes that they must be accepted in the barbarity and disorder of their graphic expression, which never concerned itself with art. For Artaud, the magical act signifies a physical engagement with the very essence of reality, in an attempt to arrive at the horizon of an open infinite by tearing at the internal tissue of the real.
Wow, ripping the real apart. Right. Again, we're having that cruelty imagery and this Dionysian imagery of the ripping apart, right? The divine androgyne is ripped apart. The sacrifice is ripped apart by the maenads, the ripping apart at birth that comes out of that causes new life. Right. Wow, wow, wow.
Totally. Just beautiful stuff.
And that ends our slides. That's our last slide. Wow.
Woo! Thanks for coming
Wild.
along on this journey.
So, Graham, what is your take on these essays so far? What is your take
My take.
on Artaud? What do you make of all this?
Um, oh, that's a big question. I guess it helps really uh redefine, reinforce and reframe a lot of Artaud's mystical tendencies and like elements.
I think it's
You
really
know?
placing Artaud, all these examples and these contexts are really framing him pretty clearly within the Greco-Roman magical tradition. You know, there
Yeah.
are some other elements for sure, but he's very much
I mean,
operating in that guise.
his mom was a Levantine Greek, so
There you
maybe he
go.
felt some sort of connection to it.
I mean, he did write Heliogabalus. He went and read all those sources.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was empowered in this to a certain degree. I don't think he knew Greek, but he certainly was diving deep. But
Yeah,
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 interesting. My thing is that, he's very much in the same breath as a character like Crowley, where they're engaging in this magical creative work of self-creation and empowerment to, on
that's
this kind
true.
of muse path, on this Dionysian, Luciferian, if you want to call it, path, this left-handed type path of
Yeah,
realization through the destruction of the self in the case of Artaud, right?
100%, 100%.
Which is a bit different than Crowley, because at first you would be like, how can you compare Crowley and Artaud? Crowley's into this, trying to empower himself and his will and his desires, trying to experience the totality of life and to push himself through all those barriers. And he's certainly not trying to destroy his ego. But
Yeah,
I see such a similarity between these figures, right? They're coming to the same conclusions and they're seeing the same things, and they're engaged in similar artistic practices, even though they come to find different final ideals.
yeah,
Interesting. So what are the
yeah.
next essays? What are we going to be diving into part two?
Artaud's Book of the Dead, which explores Bardo
His
and
more Buddhist
electroshock.
stuff, his more
Bardo,
East.
yeah, Eastern mysticism, but he links it to electroshock.
Oh wow.
Daughters of the Heart, which talks about his relationships
The
with
nymphs.
some of the women in his life, and then it ends with
Hmm.
the Jesus Staff of Artaud.
Oh, that's amazing, right?
So
This
next
is
week,
wild stuff.
next time is gonna be just as crazy as this one.
I still wonder what happened to the Jesus staff of Artaud. Where
I
is it?
know. What's interesting is that in that essay, he alludes to other canes and other staffs that stayed.
Oh,
That he calls
interesting.
this, in which he calls this staff of Saint Patrick a prototype.
Okay, it wasn't even his final creation of his magical
Not his
weapon.
final. Yeah, yeah. He lost it. He believes that a double owns it. And so he creates a new one. And in a Sinister Assassin, Stephen Barber talks about how after his release from the asylums, he fashioned a new cane that he bent into the shape of a serpent. And he would strike this
Oh,
wooden block and do like yell like glossolalia while like slamming this wooden block with a serpent staff.
that's so wild. And the glossolalia stuff that immediately connects to this Etruscan Tacita, Angerona, Acca type
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
Like that's some
totally,
wild
totally.
wildness there. La la,
Yeah.
right? For those
So
with
we're gonna have a
ears to
lot of
hear.
fun with the next part, I think.
Oh man, yeah, we gotta love Arto. Arto is just the
He
creme
saved
de
my
la creme.
life in more than
Yeah,
one way.
yeah, yeah. He's a profound artist and a poet and a true magical creator, and someone who really was trying to overcome their madness and trying to empower themselves. Really, really beautiful
Yeah.
character. Is there anything you want to leave our audience with for this essay? For this episode. And just a reminder that we're going to be back next Saturday with part two.
Yes, we are. There is something I want to leave us with, if I can find it. No, I can't find it. But something about
No worries.
sorry.
It's all good, my
Um,
friend.
oh yeah, yeah. The duty of the writer, of the poet, is not to cowardly hide behind a text from which he will never emerge, but on the contrary, to emerge, to attack and shake the mind of the public. If not, what use is he?
Wow. And that really sums up even Artaud's art, right? Everything was an attack. His all of his theater, all of his performance, everything was designed to upset the status quo and to try to rip us free from the
He wanted to
veil.
shatter the preconceived notions we have of ourselves and of reality to embrace our true forms.
Love it. Amazing stuff. All right, everyone. Thank you guys for joining us. This has been so much fun. Thank you for watching Searching for Dragons. And make sure you guys go check out this beautiful book by Peter Valente. You can pick this up at Infinity Land Press. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book, The Obliteration of the World, the Occult Belief System of Antonin Artaud. And we'll be back next week with part 2, the same time, 9 p.m. next Saturday. But we also have another beautiful thing that we're going to be doing. Graham, do you want to talk about your new collection that you've just released?
Yeah, so I just put together the Things in My Chest Volume 2. Things in My Chest is my publishing company. And this is an anthology of 12 poets. Um, it's all mental health themed poetry. And I'm printing 40 copies to start with. But all the profits are being donated to a local organization called Orchestra, which is dedicated to providing low-income children with musical instruments.
That's beautiful.
Um,
Beautiful,
it's,
beautiful
it, tur-
stuff.
it turned out great, and even my friend Brian is this vocalist in a band that I love, Boston Aj, and he contributed some writing to it as well, which is pretty awesome. But yeah,
Amazing.
I'm really excited about this. It took about a year to put together. Um, so to
And that
see it
gets
on
released on Monday, right?
yeah, Monday I pick up the copies.
Amazing.
Um,
And we're going to do a deep dive on Wednesday night, eh?
yeah, I'm down.
Okay. So make sure you guys turn into that. Go check out. If you go into the links here, you can find links to Graham's publication house, thingsinmychest.com, and you can pick that up. I'm actually one of the contributors in this particular
You
collection.
are.
I submitted,
You
I think it
are.
was 3 poems or 2 poems. I can't, 4 poems. Wow.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
they're great. They're all great. Yeah.
Amazing. So that's so much fun. So make sure you guys stay tuned for that, and make sure you go support Graham and their poetry collections. Anything else on the way, Graham, that you got working?
Anything else on the way? Yeah, so I'm still working on my clozapine journal, which I will publish probably in December.
Amazing.
Sort of about my experiences with a specific medication I've been slowly increasing the dose of over the past year. And trying to put together something for Draconic Works. Be
Right.
nice to
Yeah.
be nice to get a bunch of people's voices together to put together in a book. I think that'd be fun.
Yeah, yeah. So Graham and I are working on starting another publication house. This time it's going to be for doing more magical works and collaborative works. We're hoping to, our first work that we want to do is a poetry collection inspired by the Muses, where we're going to collect a bunch of poetry from our friends and community members. And that should be really, really good, as well as some art. But we're also hoping to eventually do translations and to republish things that are in the public domain. So one of the things we really want to do
Exactly.
is go back and give new light to a lot of these poets and authors that have been forgotten, these that have released truly magical stuff. A lot of this stuff just needs to be brought back out, given
Yeah,
an
and
update and a fresh
re
set of eyes, you know?
recontextualized and you
Exactly.
know pieces that we think are relevant for
You know, hopefully even, you know, some stuff we want to translate, like you said, that Polish book. We were talking about translating Apollinaire would be amazing. The Fin de Babylon, you know, there's a bunch of stuff we would love to do. So
yeah.
lots of big things in the works. So stay tuned. We'll be back on Wednesday with our deep dive into Graham's new collection, Things in My Chest, to his uh, poetry collection all about mental health with 12 different poets, I believe. How many poets?
Yeah, 12.
12 different poets. So we'll be doing that on Wednesday. And then on Saturday, we'll be back with part 2 of our deep dive into Antonin Artaud in this particular book by Peter Valente, The Obliteration of the World, the Occult Belief System of Antonin Artaud. All right. So make sure you guys come out and stay tuned for that. All right. Any final words, Graham?
Dumb Spyro Spiro, while I breathe, I hope.
Beautiful stuff. Peace and love, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and take care. Okay. Where's this? There we go.